got too many of you crying. Brother, 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 far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. No, no. You see, war is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Picking lines, sister. Picket signs, sister. Don't punish me, sister. With brutality, sister. Come talk to me so you can see. Ooh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Hey, what's going on? And I'll tell you what's going on. Ooh, na 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 la da da. Father, Father, everybody thinks we're wrong. Who are they to judge us simply 'cause our hair is long? You know we got to find a way, bring some understanding here today. Picking lines, brother. Picket signs, brother. Don't punish me, brother. With brutality, brother. Come talk to me so you can see. Ooh, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Hey, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Picking lines, brother. Picket signs, brother. Don't punish me, sister. With brutality, sister. Come talk to me, brother. So you can see what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. A roll call, please.
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Mr. City Attorney, is there a closed session report?
There's no closed session report this evening.
Please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led tonight by Councilmember Petros. And please remain standing for the invocation, which will be led by Melinda Blackman of the Harbor Christian Church.
Repeat after me.
The flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible.
Let us share in a moment of silent reflection. As we join together tonight, may we act with character and conviction. May we listen to others with understanding and goodwill in our hearts. Help us to speak with charity and restraint. Give us a spirit of service. May we be reminded that we are stewards of this precious city. Grant us the ability to see the humanity and dignity of those who disagree with us, and to treat all persons, no matter how weak or poor, with the reverence all people deserve. And finally, may we be renewed with strength of joy from helping to build a community worthy of all its residents and visitors. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Thank you. If I could invite Marissa Fortuno to come forward. We have a presentation tonight. As Marissa's coming forward, allow me to begin reading this, and then we'll have some comments from our guests. Whereas, while progress has been significant in reducing deaths from heart disease, it is still the #1 killer of both women and men. And whereas cardiovascular diseases are the nation's leading cause of death and costliest disease, with direct and indirect costs estimated to be $312.6 billion, and whereas between 1999 and 2009, the rate of deaths from cardiovascular disease fell 32.7%, but still accounted for nearly 1 in 3 deaths in the nation. And whereas about 2,150 people die from cardiovascular disease each day, accounting for about 1 death every 40 seconds. And whereas the American Heart Association's 2020 impact goal seeks to improve the cardiovascular health of all Americans by 20%, while reducing deaths from cardiovascular diseases and stroke by 20% through research, population and community level interventions, public health, and policy measures. And whereas the efforts of the American Heart Association encourage citizens to help save lives by calling 911 if symptoms occur, become trained in CPR, and encourage comprehensive automated external defibrillator programs in their communities. And whereas the American Heart Association is celebrating February 2013 as American Heart Month, and promoting education and awareness by encouraging citizens to learn the warning signs of heart attack and stroke. Now, I, therefore, Keith Curry, Mayor of Newport Beach, on behalf of the entire Newport Beach City Council, do hereby proclaim February 2013 as American Heart Month in Newport Beach. We have some guests today, and before we go down from the photo, perhaps you'd like to make some comments. Hi.
Well, we thank you so much for recognizing February as American Heart Month. American Heart Association's mission is to build healthier lives free of cardiovascular disease and stroke, and we rely so much on our volunteers, especially our volunteer leaders, who spread this message of awareness and a message of hope. And so I'd like to introduce Judy Brandt and Ray Brandt, who are both survivors and longtime volunteers, to share the message.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you, Council, and thank you, Keith. We really appreciate the issuing of this proclamation. As she said, both Ray and I are survivors of heart surgery and alive thanks to prior research by the American Heart Association. American Heart Month provides us with the perfect platform to increase awareness for heart disease, our nation's #1 killer, all ages and both sexes. Sadly, heart disease is often silent and misunderstood. Through American Heart Month, we are able to shed light on this health threat and educate the public on simple steps we can each take to improve heart health. Much of heart health is curable and preventable. Across Orange County, you will see buildings, landmarks, and companies showing their support by displaying red in their lobbies, encouraging their employees to wear red, and distributing heart health information through internal handouts and lunch and learn presentations. Having your support through this proclamation is very meaningful. Thank you. Information on how you can take charge of your heart health can be found at the American Heart Association website. If you can just remember 3 things, some simple tips to help you keep heart healthy. Eat better, just more fruits, veggies, whole grains, low-fat dairy, lean meats, and when we need that treat now and then, dark chocolate and red wine. Get more physical activity. Just 30 minutes a day of walking can make a vast improvement. It doesn't always have to be at the same time either. 10 minutes 3 times a day does wonders. And know your numbers. That means regular checkups with your doctor to know your cholesterol, blood pressure, body mass index, and weight. Thank you again for this display of your concern for the health of our community. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Judy. Come down and we'll... Thank you all for coming down and for all the work you did to help make this a healthier community. It's important, and we should take this to heart. Next item is notice to the public.
The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium. The City Council of Newport Beach welcomes and encourages community participation. Public comments are generally limited to 3 minutes per person to allow everyone to speak. Written comments are encouraged as well. The City Council has a discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report.
Councilmember Daigle.
Yes, thank you. Among the things going on out there is I attended a meeting of the Southern California Water Committee, and they had a presentation by Secretary Mark Cowan, who is our California Secretary of Water Resources. And you'll be voting on a water bond this year. And here in Newport Beach, when you drink a glass of water, 68% is from the regional groundwater supply, and 32% is from imported supply, Northern California and the Colorado River. And Secretary Cowan's speech focused on the Northern California supply. And so the Bay Delta Plan is in its final stages, and a state water bond will be in the ballot in the next 12 months. And water is one of this year's blockbuster legislative issues, and it's also part of our proposed city legislative agenda. And it underscores the point that partisan politics is much less important than generally assumed. Water in California has always been an issue that generates regional as well as ideological friction. Most of the state's water supply originates in the sparsely populated northeastern quadrant of the state, and most of the demand comes from Central Valley farmers, Southern California homes and industries, and Silicon Valley, where they're making computer chips. And so for decades, the focus of the conflict has been the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, into which the water flows and from which transshipments to the south are taken. More than half of the contracts with the state are with the MWD, or Metropolitan Water District. And so Governor Jerry Brown is trying to jumpstart the long-stalled project to bypass the Delta with an alternate conveyance. and the water users in the South are all for it. It continues to face stiff opposition from those in the North and from environmentalists who believe that stabilizing supplies will be growth-inducing. A bond issue is needed not to pay for the new conveyance, but rather to lubricate the ancillary projects tied to it. It provides a new forum for California's perpetual water wars, but there's not even a hint of partisanship in the battle. It's all about regionalism, economic interests, and ideology. The Delta Plan, according to the Secretary, is a big plan to solve big problems. They're looking at the economic value of avoiding further cuts to the water supply. They're using an integrated management strategy. So within the next month, the CEQA will be complete, and that's the state environmental process. They also have the buy-in of the numerous resource agencies, all of which revolve around the fish. And there's lots of benefits to the fish that they see, including addressing toxicity. But the state of California is also concerned about climate change, of which there's considerable scientific uncertainty. So they've had to manage their risk in this plan with respect to that issue. The next step is the state will negotiate with their contractors, including the MWD. Now, Newport Beach, we're a retail agency, and we purchase our water from the Orange County Water District, Metropolitan District of Orange County, who then buys from MWD, who then buys from the state. And then following that, look for the governor to renegotiate the bond and get back on the road to try and sell it to voters. And they're going to try really hard to attract local support and provide incentives. The governor recognizes that he needs to whittle down the bond that was passed the last time by the legislature. It completely failed at the polls, and the main attack was the fact that it was totally loaded with pork. So they're going to have to address that. But it is a big issue this year, and it's exciting that after many years, California has a water plan from the north to bring forward. So thank you.
Mr. Henn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one item. The Balboa Village Advisory Committee will be meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, at 4 p.m. at the Exploration offices down in Balboa Village. And the main agenda item will be to review maintenance requirements in Balboa Village. We're going to get a good education about what we do currently to maintain that area, and then also talk about ideas for raising the standards of maintenance in the Balboa Village. This is all part of the master plan that Council approved moving forward with, at least conceptually, a few months ago. And so I'm looking forward to that. We most certainly would welcome public input into that discussion, so please feel free to join us if you have the time. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. at Exploration in Balboa Village. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Selich.
No reports.
Councilmember Gardner.
First, I'd like to pass on a compliment to the city manager and the public information officer. I was at a meeting of a nonprofit that deals with local governments, and they said it was very difficult in many cities to find out the contact information for staff members or even council members, and how easy it was in Newport Beach. Secondly, I would ask the city manager to bring back at the next council meeting a 1 or 2 line item to see if the rest of the council wants to spend any time on it. I got a call from a resident who had been listening to a generator for 2 weeks, and it was a generator attached to some new construction, and he didn't understand why they couldn't be tied up to the electric power grid because they'd known for a long time that they were going to be building. And I think that that makes some sense. They should be able to coordinate that. So could you bring something back to see if there's any support for spending some staff time on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Petros.
I would just report that this weekend I was fortunate enough to meet with our friends at Newport Shores. I learned an extremely valuable lesson that there's always reason to celebrate in Newport Shores. The folks there are very, very engaged in our community, and as a result, we'll be bringing back on their behalf some issues to discuss at the council. I would alert the council and the public to know that the Army Corps of Engineers has started a dredge project over on their parcel adjacent to the Banning Ranch. It has an outfall. It's sand dredge that will be conveyed in a pipe across the beach around the 61st Street lifeguard tower to a point about 1,000 feet offshore. It is intended as not only to refurbish the area around the Army Corps area, but also as a sand replenishment for our beaches ultimately. Likewise, the Army Corps has started their work on the, and I'm going to blow this word, Seminok Slough. There is some question about the city's preparedness on our part of the slough, and so if I could please ask that some report be made at the next meeting as to our progress on that, wherever our part of that is. I think that the public would be grateful and appreciate it. Thank you.
Tony, I think Jim Mosher could probably help you with the pronunciation of that, so maybe when he comes up to make a comment.
Mayor Pro Tem Hill.
I believe that council members, at least some, received a communication over the past couple of weeks from our Centennial Mayor, Don Webb, related to the possibility of bringing to this new council site, the new Civic Center site, some of the actual formal seals of the city, which in reality have color in them. And I think that that's a very valid proposition, and I would like to have something brought back to the council so that we could look at the probability of possibly adding some color to our council chambers and a bit of history to this site related to the history of the city. So I'd like to see something come back with respect to that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. As most of you know, it's been 3 weeks since our last council meeting. We had an extra week, and it's been a busy time for our city. On the 23rd of January, it was my privilege to speak to 4 of the government classes at Newport Harbor High School, as well as the Junior Statesmen of America chapter who meets there. I will tell you, we have some very knowledgeable and engaged young people in our city. It was really very encouraging to see them and to answer their questions and help them understand our government a little bit better. On January 25th, I was able to represent the city on KNX Radio. They were broadcasting from the Explore Ocean facility on Balboa Peninsula and doing one of their On Your Corner programs and really highlighting throughout the course of the entire day Newport Beach to all of the listeners throughout Southern California. On the 31st, along with Councilmember Gardner and Mayor Pro Tem Hill and Councilmember Petros, I was at the Fire Awards presentation for the annual awards of valor to our firemen. And I will just tell you that there were some very heroic stories told about the job that our firemen do day in and day out to protect our community. Also on the 31st, I was privileged to speak in Santa Ana at a Holocaust remembrance program called The Courage to Remember, which is still going on at the Santa Ana Police Community Room, and I encourage all of you to try and get up and see it. It's a very meaningful program and one that I was particularly pleased to participate in. I represented the city that evening at the Orange County Business Council dinner, and once again, Newport Beach is recognized as being one of the very best business locations in Orange County. On the 5th, I had a chance to have lunch along with some other elected officials with Aaron Kutchner, the new owner of the Orange County Register, and I'm just so excited about what he's doing to revitalize print journalism in our county, and I think we're going to be in for some big improvements, and I look forward to that. And then along with Councilmember Petros, I participated and spoke briefly at the Public Policy Academy, sponsored by the Association of California Cities, Orange County. And then finally, at the Mayor's Dinner on Friday, I was privileged to announce that we have completed the dredge of the Lower Bay. And so now both Upper Bay and Lower Bay have been dredged. As Councilmember Petros said, we can now focus on some of our ancillary waterways, such as the Seminok Slough and other areas. There is some private dredging that's still going on in the harbor, so you may still see the dredges for another couple of days. But mission accomplished, and I just want to applaud Chris Miller and his crew who have coordinated that with some tremendous logistics over the course of the past several weeks to make that a reality, and I think we should all give Chris a round of applause for that good job. And with that, we'll move on to the consent calendar.
Public comments are invited on consent calendar items 1 through 18. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record. To the extent that any item is removed from the consent calendar by a council member, members of the public are invited to speak on each item for up to 3 minutes per item.
Does anyone on the City Council wish to have an item removed from the consent calendar? Councilmember Gardner. Councilmember Petros. Mayor Pro Tem Hill.
I must recuse myself on item 15 as I own property within 500 feet of that property under consideration.
Okay, Councilmember Daigle.
On number 4, please register a no vote for Daigle.
Okay. Mr. Hinton.
I have nothing.
Mr. Selich.
On item number 4, I have to recuse myself on that as I own a residential dock, so have the vote reflect that, please.
Okay. At this point in time, I will invite public comment on the entire consent calendar. You have 3 minutes for your comments on the consent calendar. If you have any, please come forward.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. I guess I should be thanking you for this opportunity to have 180 seconds to speak about 18 items. At 10 seconds apiece, I had kind of measured out what I would say, but in looking at the stuff in the lobby, there was one I had not planned to talk about that it looks like I should. This is agenda item number 5, which is a series of 4 resolutions of vacating sewer easements that the city has along Kings Road. And since this is a document that is going to be permanently recorded with the homeowners' papers in the county, I assume you want it to be correct and professional. The amended version, if you look at page 2 of it, seems to have a number of corrections made, but it seems to have something missing. This is the amended one I'm looking at here. There's 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. Between the second and third, it seems to be ungrammatical. It says "and something," and then the something is missing, and then it begins "now therefore." Comparing that to the previous copy, I think in the word processor, you're trying to delete a word, an entire paragraph got deleted, which was mentioning how the hearing that you're having tonight was noticed, mentioning the notices were posted 300 feet apart along King's Place and so forth. So I suspect that was inadvertent rather than advertent, and you might want to put that paragraph back in the 4 resolutions that you are going to adopt. What I really wanted to talk about, since I can't talk about the other ones, is item number 13, which is a $250,000 so-called on-call contract with a single private firm to provide unspecified surveying services over the coming year. As I've said before, I don't think allowing a proliferation of large-ticket on-call contracts is wise. The city manager's own internal policy said the on-call mechanism was intended for very small jobs, such as a minor electrical repair, too tiny to justify an individual contract. This ongoing expansion of the on-call program provides an opportunity for large amounts of public money to be awarded in a non-competitive way with at best very minimal oversight. That may be convenient for the staff, but it grates against the normal concepts of public trust. How do we know the firms quietly selected for these contracts are actually providing us with truly necessary work and at the best price? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments on the consent calendar? All right, seeing none, come on down. Yes, sir.
Mayor Curry and council, Walter Richardson, 107 Crystal Avenue, Balboa Island. I am a resident of Little Balboa Island and also a member of the board of directors of the Homeowners Association of Little Balboa Island. I would like to speak as a resident of the island on item 19, the lot merger.
Okay, that's not on the consent calendar. That's coming up shortly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No trouble. We'll see you in a little bit.
All right.
Yes, ma'am. Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Kelly O'Neill, and I am here to speak about consent number 6, which is the breaking through of the alley at 912 East Oceanfront. I own the house next door, and I am not here to to contest the breaking through. I just have a couple of concerns, and that is that I want to make sure that the fence is repaired. They're going to knock down the house and the fence line and make a mess. I want to make sure that my fence line is in a tidy and operable state when they're finished, and that my phone line, which is against the current fence that is going to be demolished, that is also either buried or fixed, and that the owner of the property incur the costs.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any further public comments on this consent calendar? All right, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back. Staff, do you have any comments on the alley situation or any of the other matters that were brought up?
Well, yes, on item 6, we will pass that on. That's a yard fence that we'll have to keep intact, and for safety anyway, have that up and running when we do the project. We'll make sure the construction inspector knows that. We'll pass it on. Also, on just a note on our on-call services, as you know, we do a lot of capital work, as you know, going through this, and there's been mention about cost parity and making sure we get the best cost. These on-calls are all for professional services, and they're based on qualifications and not cost. We do go through a selection process and do these about every 2 years and get firms. There is a competitive process that goes in, but we find it advantageous to use on-call staff because we have so many projects, and it'd be very staff intensive to do RFPs on each little application. So just want to point that out to you, Mr. Mosier.
Thank you.
Mayor Curry?
Mr. Petros.
If I could just get a clarification again, Dave, I just want to make sure I heard you right. With regards to the item 6, the vacation, you will send out enforcement folks to monitor the work of the contractor. The contractor is ultimately responsible, though, for the condition of the fence and the wall and all that through construction.
This is correct. We will also tell our folks ahead of time just to be wary of that, and if they have any additional problems next door, they can call us and we'll be on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion then for the consent calendar?
Mr. Mayor, I would move the consent calendar acknowledging the recusal of Councilman Selledge on item number 4, the no vote by Councilperson Daigle on number 4, and the recusal by Mayor Pro Tem Hill on agenda item number 15.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right. If no further discussion, please vote.
Prior to reading the vote, I'll read the ordinance titles for item 3 and 4, ordinance number 2013-2, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Newport Beach granting a non-exclusive solid waste franchise to Ecology Auto Parts, Inc., a California corporation to provide solid waste collection services upon the city streets and within the City of Newport Beach. For item 4, ordinance number 2013-1, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Newport Beach amending Chapter 3.36 and Title 17 of the Newport Beach Municipal Code relating to commercial and non-commercial tidelands uses. With that, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. We're now ready for public comments on non-agenda items.
Switch back my program. Public comments are invited on non-agenda items generally considered to be within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes. Before speaking, please state your name for the record.
We'll give alumni preference here to the former Centennial, or I guess always Centennial Mayor, Mr. Webb.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Curry and members of the council. I am Don Webb, as you mentioned, the Centennial Mayor. It's been a little over 2 years since I've offered to you at least, my sage advice and some city history. You knew I wouldn't stay away forever. Thursday, you should have received my letter as well as the booklet on the city seal. And I hope you had time to review this. And thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem Hill, for adding that item on the agenda. Shown above and on your screens, that's our city seal. And It has little resemblance to the gray disc over there, which some have referred to as 1943 steel penny or something to that. Some of you older people might recognize. Our city seal was designed by a local artist, of some renown, Rex Brandt, in 1957, and adopted by the City Council. Please note it has many colors, and it is not gray. You can see two albacore that represent our origin as a fishing village, as well as waves heading for our beaches. The sailboats remind us that we are a recreational area and a yachting resort. The outer golden circle surrounding the seal suggests the four cardinal points of the compass which encircle the whole as a nautical theme. We have one of the most, in my opinion, artistic and colorful city seals in the nation. Can I have the second slide, please? This city council chambers could use a little more color, as Mayor Hill has mentioned. To give you an idea of what that real city seal would look like here in the chambers, I've photoshopped in the city seal mounted over the gray disc. You need to decide yourselves on what size it should be. The existing gray disc is 36 inches, that one over there. The picture I have gives you the relationship at 48 inches, and I also, in the booklet, gave you a copy of one that would show 60 inches. I kind of like the 48 inches, but the 60-inch wouldn't be all that bad either. Of all the places in the city you would expect most to see the true city seal, it would be here in the seat of government. My request is simple. Get rid of the gray disc and replace it with the true seal of this wonderful city of Newport Beach. Thank you for considering this matter and placing it on the future agenda. And by the way, just a reminder, as your Centennial Mayor, I am available to be called upon at any time to offer sage advice and a little historic tidbits about the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Are there other speakers? Please come forward.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Barbara Della Pena. I live on Seashore Drive. I have a concern with the dredging project. Mr. Kiff and I go back from 2004. We were much younger then. I feel like I'm in a new age church right now. This is really pretty. You guys have got a good thing going. I have two concerns. My first concern is public notice. Reviewing the environmental assessment, and also what was supposed to happen is the citizens were supposed to have been given 14 days notice. It didn't happen. My second issue is with the quality of things that are being piped offshore. Now, I've called the city and spoken with several people, and I've had a wonderful response from Mr. Petros. But when I called and said I was concerned about the quality of the water, Mr. Webb told me that if I didn't like it and I was so uncomfortable, I should go swim at another beach. I didn't find that an appropriate response from a city employee. I didn't think it was an appropriate response when I'm only asking for cleaner water, and I was very offended by the comment. Notice was not given. The Coastal Commission gave a negative determination on this based on previous projects. They didn't exactly look at the water quality. When I looked through the environmental assessment, I found out that core samples were taken between 1 inch and 4 inches, 10 inches deep. They're only testing for enterococcus. I've got articles here from the Orange County Register about other diseases that birds carry that we're not screening for. This is going only 800 feet offshore at a 22 mean sea level depth. I have concerns about that because I believe that the Army is doing a wonderful job. They know their job, they do it well. I think the city is doing a wonderful job because you're doing the maintenance that needs to be done, and it's an arduous process. But I am concerned about sort of just rubber stamping the fact that the Corps of Engineers dotted their I's and crossed their T's, because when I examine it, 2/3 of the core samples were unacceptable for beach deposition or offshore deposition. 2/3. That means 1/3 isn't. When I called the city again and said, how is the dredge operator supposed to know area B and G, which happened to be the only two areas that were clean, and he said, well, we just average it. I don't think in a fine city as this, with such a great city hall and great people serving us, that just taking an average of things that 2/3 are bad, of that 1/3 is good enough for the people and the citizens of the city, especially without adequate notification. So I'm not sure what I'm asking for, but I think that maybe we could look at accepting that sand from them and have another option, because 2/3 of it is going to be trucked to an upland facility. And I would like an apology from the guy that told me to go swim at another beach, because I thought that was very rude. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have other speakers today?
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. I had two comments I'd like to make. First of all, on Sunday, as you probably know, I copied you on a letter I sent to the local Board of Education, which is meeting at this very hour in their boardroom in Costa Mesa, asking them to agendize for their discussion where the Newport Mesa School District boundary should properly lay in the airport area, a matter which will affect residents of that area, which our general plan says could be, and with Uptown Newport we expect very soon to be, residential. I don't know what the school board may do with that request, but I do hope you will be on board with the idea that having future Newport Beach residents in that area in the same school district as our other families and children would be a very good thing for community cohesiveness. Second, when the Newport Beach residents were weighing the merits of Measure EE last November, there was considerable debate as to whether charter cities have a power to bar the public from filing class action claims against them, particularly for recovery of improperly charged taxes. So to follow up on that, I wanted to let you know that 3 weeks from today at 9 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco, the California Supreme Court will be hearing a case called McWilliams versus Long Beach, which is intended to definitively answer that exact question. I don't know if you have instructed our city attorney to submit comments or arguments on that, but with Newport Beach being one of the first cities to attempt to put such a provision in its charter, it will be interesting to see what the California Supreme Court ultimately decides. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other people who would like to comment? Please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comments. Thank you all tonight. Let me now go to oral reports from City Council members on committee activities. Councilmember Gardner? Mr. Petros?
Just a quick note that I am working with staff to reconvene the bicycle committee. I know that that is something that you brought up in the mayor's comments and is very, very near to many of my colleagues. We will be reconvening that and have a lot to do. So,
thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Hill?
No report.
Councilmember Daigle?
Yes, our Citizens Aviation Committee meets monthly, Mondays, fourth Monday of the month at the Central Library at 8 a.m. You're all welcome to join us. And one of the issues that we've been working on is the retaining of General Electric Aviation, and they're going to be, or they are retained for to address departure issues related to John Wayne Airport. And so their mission, I suppose, is to address the feasibility of developing more precise departure procedures to benefit all the residents of the city. The city, we've met twice with the FAA. They've made some adjustments to these departure procedures, and there was some positive effects in some parts of the community. But we think that they can tweak it a little bit more. But we also recognize that in order to make that happen, we're going to need to build a really strong technical case, and so that's a reason that we hired GE. Now, on February 6th, the representatives of GE visited the city and met with local community members to understand the various concerns raised by citizens throughout the community. And one message that is abundantly clear is that we need to have a unified position. We can't get into east versus west. So I believe that all the participants in the meeting came away with a positive view of the initial meeting, and I want to thank all those who participated. So in addition to the recommendations that the GE report may produce, and that will come to the council in early March, their initial evaluation, and we would then seek the acceptance and support of the airport and of the FAA after the council weighs in on potential changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hinn.
No reports.
Mr. Selich.
No reports this evening.
And I have no reports. So now we'll go to public hearings. Item 19, Residential Lot Merger Code Amendment. Ms. Brandt.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. This is an amendment to the zoning code having to do with lot mergers, and it was something that generated from a request from then Mayor Gardner, and Pat Alford, our planning manager, will give a staff report.
Mayor Curry and members of the City Council, as stated, this was directed by the City Council with the intent of basically limiting the floor area on future lot mergers or otherwise reconfigurations of lots. The increase in floor area potentially occurs when you have a lot merger or a reconfiguration that eliminates required setbacks. An example I showed on the PowerPoint presentation, you see these setback areas that would normally be on the sides in this example would be eliminated, and then that area would be added to the buildable area, and they're formulated into the eventual floor area that could be achieved on the merged or reconfigured lot. This amendment would apply to future lot configurations after the effective date of this ordinance, and it would only apply when you have the largest of the lots involved in a reconfiguration increasing in area by more than 50%. And this reconfiguration would only apply to the older areas of the city, namely West Newport, Balboa Peninsula, Lido Isle, Balboa Island, and Corona del Mar. Now, one question is why the 50% increase threshold? And the reason for that, we were looking for an appropriate percentage that would allow a merger or reconfiguration of lot fragments to create a lot more towards city standards. And the example is shown here, you have a small fragment of a lot that is incorporated into another parcel, and it is small enough where it would not be subject to this limitation.
I don't know what I'm looking at. Can you, I see the square marked parcel 1.
Mm-hmm.
So is that little dotted line, is that where the fragment would have been?
That is correct.
Okay.
And many of these older areas of towns, you have these areas where you have the original subdivision, and then through various mechanisms over the years, you have lots overlapping each other, and through various mechanisms, people want to consolidate them into legal lots, and we don't want to discourage that. The real aim of this is to deal with very large lot mergers that could result in potentially larger homes through the increase in the buildable area. As I indicated, this will only apply to the older areas of towns, and it's highlighted here. And yes, and the area shaded is the older areas of town. So basically that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Alford before we go to public comments? Councilman Gardner.
I do. It was a little hard to tell from the planning commissions because the minutes are truncated, but when we were this initially actually came out of the planning commission when we were dealing with the Ocean Boulevard lot mergers, and one of the considerations had been not just the size, but the fact that we lost those areaways that could provide some visual corridors and that sort of thing. And so one of the thoughts had been to be sure that you still had sufficient space on one side or the other, or both sides. There was some, leaving creativity as to how you place them, but we're not worried about the side setbacks and that sort of thing in this?
I think what you're referring to is the outcome of that lot merger, the setbacks were voluntarily increased. We did investigate the possibility of mandating increased setbacks, but there were some issues involved with that. To increase the setbacks sufficiently to bring the floor area down to what existed prior to the lot configuration would create fairly deep setbacks that could present their own compatibility issues in a neighborhood. Also, we're dealing with a lot of different variables here, different types of lot configurations, and increased side setbacks may not work in every situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Selich.
Well, my question was on the same line as Councilwoman Gardner's. I guess I thought that when we did this, we'd be looking at increasing the distance between buildings, because that's where you get the appearance of the bulk and the mass of the buildings, where, to me, this doesn't seem to necessarily do that. So I was a little bit surprised at the result, I guess, we got out of this.
Mr. Hill?
I guess, quoting the mayor, I'm not certain that this is not a solution for which we don't have a problem. I have a concern about this. I mean, if I look at your 50% rule and I look at the XYZ exhibit that you had, if Y is less than 50% of X, then I assume I can merge those lots and not have any impact. And then if I turn around and come back and I want to put Z into X and Y combined, I'm still less than 50%, and so I can do that again. And so, you know, I see that as a way around this, if you will. But I've been involved in a lot of times when we want to encourage the merger of lots for certain reasons. And, for example, you've got Lido Plaza, Lido Village in your grade area, I believe, and we would give everything we had to give to get those lots merged together into one larger lot. And so, you know, I believe once again that it's a massing issue, and that to me you address massing issues has been discussed with setbacks, and setbacks that vary as the height goes up, and articulation and these different types of things. And so I'm not supportive of going down this route, because I think it's just going to add a layer of complexity for which I'm not sure there's an issue.
Councilman Gardner?
Well, there certainly seems to be an issue in my part of town. There's a big concern that we are just losing the character if we don't at least provide some kind of controls, because you get a house on 2 or 3 lots with the setback is 3 feet, and it looks totally out of character, and that's part of our general plan, is trying to maintain the character. But as I say, I thought that one of the things I had liked about the way the Ocean Boulevard thing came out was that a big house with a big lot, I mean, with some yard to it, doesn't seem to be as massive. So I'm not totally convinced that we shouldn't be tying some of that in, but maybe I'll wait till public comment and get some other ideas.
Okay. There's no further council questions. What I'd like to do is open the public hearing and invite the public to come forward. And, sir, this is the item now. So if you'd like to come forward, we'll be happy to hear your testimony.
Well, that wasn't a very good start initially.
You're experienced now.
Yes. Walter Richardson, 107 Crystal Avenue, Balboa Island. As a resident of the island and also a member of the board of directors of the Little Island Property Owners Association, I would like to speak as a resident at the moment on item 19. Balboa Island, Corona del Mar, and parts of the peninsula, obviously you all know, they're very special and unique neighborhoods in the city of Newport Beach, mainly based on lot size and square footage of the houses. So that's the character that people seem to like in all of those areas, why they want to live there, keeps the property values high, and creates a charming character that we would like not to see destroyed. This results, 30 by 85 foot lots result in a street scene of narrow houses, obviously, with great variety of individual styles, which is the character of these neighborhoods. This has made the island a sought-after place to live, most of its history, and maintain the high property values accordingly. We know that owning a double lot or merging two, you can obviously build a wider house, but still adhering to the square footage of buildable requirements, and that's kind of a key issue, we think. To allow any significant increase in the allowable buildable square footage is our major concern. To allow more of that would greatly impact the overall character of the island in a very negative way. We therefore, at the moment anyway, strongly support the proposed amendment. I think there's been some interesting comments by council members which should be addressed and looked at, and I especially appreciate Councilwoman Gardner's comments on maintaining character. I think that's what we're all about on Balboa Island. So we're very pleased with the work that the city has done to date and the staff in putting this amendment together. And I imagine with a little fine-tuning, it could solve a lot of these problems. So we strongly support that. And thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments, please? Come forward.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. With regard to the truncated Planning Commission minutes that are in your agenda packet, I would like to note that for the last few weeks, the Planning Division has been posting the audio minutes, as they call them, or actual recordings, much as the recordings here are posted on the website. So one with enough patience can actually listen to those and find out what the minutes are trying to say. If you do so, you would find that at this Planning Commission meeting, there was considerable confusion as to what actually the City Council was asking for and whether that had been properly filtered through the city staff or had kind of come to them in a somewhat distorted form. Among those was the obvious question of why, if this idea of preventing an increase in buildable area as a result of lot mergers is a good idea, why it would not apply to the whole city. It was really hard for them to understand or fathom why property owners in Corona Del Mar would have this restriction on them, but those in Newport Heights, for instance, would not. And they felt constrained to not address that because staff had noticed this already as a proposed amendment that would apply only to specific areas. The obvious solution to that, which nobody brought up, was it could have been renoticed as a item potentially applying to the whole city if you can find some formula that does make sense. There are a couple of other outstanding issues, among which, sort of as Councilman Hill alluded to, a bit like Proposition 13, this can lead to what seem to be inequities, depending on the exact history of how a property came to be the way it is today. I believe, for example, there are cases in our city of standard-sized lots that for reasons in the past were subdivided into two very tiny lots, and if the owner of that two little tiny lots wants to merge them back together into one standard-sized lot, kind of like Proposition 13, they will not have the same entitlement to buildable area as their neighbor who had the standard-sized lot all along. And I would also, I'm not sure if this is exactly addressing what Councilman Gardner was talking about, but as presented to the Planning Commission by the staff, this was actually addressed in terms of increases in street width, and it was I who suggested that using as a standard how much the area of the lot increased would be a more sensible standard, easier to apply to a vast set of circumstances. But that message was very garbled, and it was one of the planning commissioners quite cogently argued that perhaps what you really were wanting was something addressed to how much width is increased having to do with these view corridors, rather than just the overall bulk of the property. So those are the two things I wanted to point out to you. The Planning Commission was a little bit confused as to what you wanted, and they rather would have liked to have the opportunity to consider this being applied to the whole city. But as this was noticed here also, you don't seem to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other public comments? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment portion of the hearing and bring it back to the City Council. Mr. Solich.
Yeah, question for staff. Did you look at any other cities that, I'm sure we're not the first one that's had this issue come up, and how they addressed it in their zoning codes?
I'm not aware of any other communities that had similar issues. There have been some examples where they have some type of architectural review or design review, and it's usually addressed through that mechanism.
What about other cities up and down the coast, like Laguna Beach, Huntington Beach, Seal Beach? They all have the same pattern of these small, old beach lots in their downtown area. How do they deal with these issues?
It's my experience that they generally encourage the mergers of the lots if it brings them more into compliance with what their standards are today.
Thanks.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Gardner.
I like very much the fact that the basis of this, of which that if you merge two lots, you cannot exceed what you would have had, the square footage if you had with the two single lots. But I do feel that there are issues yet that we haven't completely addressed, and I'm a little nervous for us to start rewriting it. We've done this in the past, and it's not worked out well when we suddenly start to create new language on the fly like this. So my suggestion would be that we continue this and give staff some more time. I'd like, I think both Councilmen Selich and Hill have a lot of experience in this. They may have some ideas from staff, but to incorporate, to address both issues. One, should this just be in this one area, in these older areas, or does it make sense to make it citywide? And then, should we also look at the setbacks as well? Maybe not, maybe we come back with the same thing, but just to give us a little bit more time, because I think there's I have at least some concerns.
I'm going to offer that as a motion, Councilmember?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
I'll second that. Is there discussion on that?
I just had one other question. This figure that was up on the screen, was that intended to represent what it would be after application of the new approach? You know, the one with the 3 lots and the 1 lot. So the buildable area on the right, I took that to be a representation of what it would be like under the existing code if those 3 lots were merged.
Basically, the intent is that the areas that were added to the buildable area by the elimination of their interior side setbacks, we would have a note in the residential development standards basically saying that the buildable area and consequently the maximum allowable floor area would have to be the same that existed prior to the reconfiguration of the lot.
I get that, but the figure on the right, it doesn't seem like that's a representation of the reduced buildable area that would result from the application of the proposed new language.
Yeah, that's correct. It's basically to show what that configuration would have been like if they had developed independently. And so the aim of the ordinance is to maintain that same amount.
So it's not a good representation of what the new proposal would look like, I guess.
That's correct, but it was not intended to demonstrate that. I'm sorry.
So that's an issue. I do think this issue of where 2 lots are being combined and they would result in what would be considered to be a standard lot, I don't know why you'd want to penalize the buildable area in a situation like that. So I sort of agree that there's a little bit more work that could be done on this to make it more clear and to address some of the comments here.
All right, if there's no further comments, the motion by Councilmember Gardner is to continue this item. And shall we? Yes.
Sorry, before you vote on that, a couple of procedural issues then. Maybe do you want us to go back to Planning Commission and or just to the staff about what time do you think is appropriate if indeed it goes to Planning Commission? Or let me ask you that question first. Rather come back, straight back to you or go to Planning Commission, maybe the maker of the motion?
Is there any... the city attorney, are we required to do one or the other?
Well, you could continue and have it heard back here, but it'd probably be best if they're going to be looking at a lot of things to go ahead and send it back to the Planning Commission so they can kind of ferret out the
Well, except that my concern is that what they were looking at, if we're listening to the minutes apparently through Mr. Mosier, is they weren't sure what we wanted them to look at. So I'm wondering, are we going to get in that same position if we don't see it beforehand and say, well, yeah, we think this is closer to what we were talking about, since it did generate from the council?
Okay, then you could just continue it back here so you can give more direction or take another look at it.
And to what date, indefinitely or otherwise, just to look at the community development staff and see what might be appropriate time-wise? 30 days?
I would think at least 6 weeks.
So 6 weeks?
So, second meeting in March, then, if that's okay with the maker of the motion?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so to be clear, you're going to think again about whether it should apply to all areas of the city, and whether the view corridor aspects of this and the setback aspects have been adequately considered, as well as this idea of reestablishing a standard-sized lot, right? At least those items, anyway.
Well,
Maybe
the
others.
issue is as much, actually more, the bulk and the mass of the building than the actual floor area. It's the bulk and the masses, I think, is what people are concerned about in fitting in the character of the neighborhood, not necessarily the absolute floor area.
And let's be careful, too, to make sure we don't have unintended consequences in some place like the Port Streets, where you do have a lot of housing stock sort of renewal.
Well, as the city attorney suggesting, is this a good topic for a study session with you folks before it?
That's probably a good idea.
Okay. So we will come back with some ideas based on what we heard today, a study session on the,
So
in
Uh,
should I
6
change my
weeks.
motion? Or just, we can still continue this then?
I don't think there's any need to continue. We'll bring it back to a study session, then we'll re-agendize as appropriate with direction.
Okay.
So do we need to take any action at all today?
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. No action taken. Okay, let's go on to the next item, which is item 20, zoning code amendment, single-room occupancy, residential hotels, and parking for emergency shelters.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. These two amendments are also to the zoning provisions of the city's municipal code, and they are follow-up items to the city council's adoption of the housing element. Through our review of the housing element with the State of California Housing and Community Development Department, they did identify some items that needed to be followed up on in order to maintain our certification as we go forward into the next housing element cycle. So Assistant Planner Melinda will walk you through the two zoning code amendments.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Melinda Whalen, Planning Division. So basically, as Kim was saying, these are two cleanup items. Firstly, we have to reinsert the single-room occupancy residential hotels definition, and to permit SROs within commercial and office districts with the approval of a conditional use permit. And secondly, we have to add parking standards for emergency shelters. So the single-room occupancy hotel definition and provisions were inadvertently left out during the zoning code update in 2010. And reinsertion of the provisions and definitions would be pursuant to government code, and also are called for by a housing element program within our housing element, our adopted housing element. A parking standard or emergency shelters are a permitted use within the zoning code. They are permitted by right within two of the zones within the city. However, during the zoning code update in 2010, a parking standard was inadvertently left out. So staff conducted research and found an appropriate parking standard to be one parking space per 4 beds plus 1 staff, and then an additional half space per family unit. So staff recommends that the City Council introduce the ordinance and pass to a second reading, and staff is available for questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we're clear, so that everybody understands this. We are doing this to comply with state law, that the state of California requires us to have these elements in our zoning code.
That is correct.
Okay, so don't anybody get excited and think that we're opening the city up to rampant, emergency shelters or single-family or single-occupant hotel uses. This is a requirement of state law, and if people have issues with that, they should contact their state legislators.
That is correct.
Okay. Are there any questions? Let me open it up to the public. Is there any public comment on this matter? Let's see none. I'll bring it back. Is there a motion?
Move the action.
I'll second.
Motion and second. Please vote.
Prior to reading the vote, I'll read the ordinance title, ordinance number 2013-4, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Newport Beach. Is it of the City of Newport Beach, adopting zoning code amendment number CA 2012-009 regarding single-room occupancy, residential hotels, and parking requirements for emergency shelters, PA 2012-179. Motion carries unanimously.
It's telepathic now, Ed.
I would just note our illuminated, colorful seal on our vote.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, item 21, mobility telecommunications permit for foul eucalyptus tree monopole at 2401 Irvine Avenue. Is there a staff report?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I need to recuse myself. I receive income from telecommunication carriers, and the applicant Mobility enters into agreements with carriers. I would note, however, that Mobility's headquarters is here in Newport Beach.
Thank you very much. Duly noted. Thank you, Councilmember Daigle. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Curry. You're having the opportunity to see just about everybody in the Planning Division this evening. And Associate Planner Fern Nueno is going to give an overview on a proposed what we call a faux eucalyptus tree. It is the first one that has been proposed in the city of Newport Beach, and we have a very interesting presentation for you.
Good evening, Mayor Curry. I can use these new microphones here. And council members. The project before you tonight is the Mobility False Eucalyptus Tree monopole application, and it can accommodate 4 telecom carriers, including the Verizon wireless antennas that are proposed this evening. The project site is located at the intersection of Irvine Avenue and Santa Isabella Avenue, near Upper Newport Bay, along the border between the city of Costa Mesa. This is the subject property. Let's see here. These buildings in the center here are the church buildings, and there's parking lots on either side. There are existing telecom facilities already on site. 4. 2 of them are within a cross that is located in the center of the building on the northeastern side, and 2 are in the building and the faux chimney. And along the edge here are the equipment shelters for those existing carriers. And just below that is where the proposed project is today. The existing building at its highest point is 30 feet high on the right side of the screen there, and the existing church cross is at 34 feet. Oops. And the proposed project is 62 feet to the top of the tree, with 59 at the center of the top Verizon antennas there. The proposed project could accommodate 4 total carriers there, the 12 Verizon wireless antennas with the microwave antenna, and 3 additional carriers. That would be potential of 48 total antennas on site with the 4 carriers. And in front of me here, you'll see the materials board that was provided by the applicant, so you could see the fake bark and branches and tree leaves there. They'll be painted to match the eucalyptus trees.
Could you have someone bring it up so we could look at it? Thank you.
You can see adjacent, or in front of the cross, in front of the building, is where the equipment closures are, and they're painted to match the church building. This is the view from the Upper Newport Bay Trail across the street, looking towards the cross and the pine trees. And here is from Tustin Avenue. You can see clearly the cross and the faux chimney and some of the antennas that are on site already in the equipment enclosures. And this is where the proposed project would be located if approved, in the middle beyond the pine trees existing there next to the cross. And there's the same location from the other view. Staff does have...
Do you have any simulated
views?
With the...
Yeah, I have. There are some in the staff report, and then I have 2 on the screen here.
Okay.
And in your packet, there's an existing tree near Cal State Fullerton that shows a similar tree, and then there's also a closer up.
In one of the photographs in here, it says proposed eucalyptus, and there are a whole bunch of trees. Are they proposing to plant additional trees as well? That wasn't very clear.
Some of the discussions with the applicant, we were proposing that if approved as proposed, that they would have some conditions requiring additional landscaping to better blend and screen the tree from view. We would want to look at the site, but we were thinking somewhere around 3 or 4. And today you received from the applicant some revised photo simulations for, if approved, what it would look like with 4 additional trees planted.
We don't have that, though, to see?
I do.
All right.
It's at the end of the presentation. So this is where the trees would be located, and then for the photo simulations, this is the 4 that would be planted. But this is just something that the applicant proposed. Staff hasn't reviewed this thoroughly yet. So there's 5 different views showing with the 4 additional trees and the proposed project in the background there. Is there one in particular you'd like to see out of the 5 up on the screen? This one's a pretty good view from Irvine.
Can you share with me the distance from the equipment enclosure to the public right-of-way? Setback on that?
I don't know the exact. Maybe when the applicant comes up, he could provide that information. I believe it's about 10 feet, but I could be off.
Well, this shows that the simulation shows these proposed new trees being as tall as approximately as the faux tree. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are they planning on planting 60-foot trees? Or are they planning on planting 10-foot trees, and in 15 years they will be that tall?
Yes. Councilmember Gardner, as Fern indicated, we just received these simulations today with showing the additional trees. So we haven't had the time to have dialogue with the applicant, and these would be good questions, I think, when the applicant makes his presentation.
Ms. Brandt, do you have anything you'd like to add on the setback requirements in this zone for a structure like that?
Are you talking about the faux tree
No,
or
the building.
the equipment,
The equipment.
enclosure? Well, that would be an accessory structure, and it would have to comply with code. We should have the dimensions on the plan, so it wouldn't be, there's no variance being requested in terms of setbacks, so that is not necessarily a code issue.
Thank you. Okay.
So staff did have a few concerns I wanted to address before the applicant comes up. I'll leave this photo up here. One of them is the location categories that are in the municipal code. The false tree is listed as 5th out of the 8 location categories, and staff feels that a higher priority location may be feasible. One of the other concerns that staff has is the height that's requested above the 50-foot height limit, 12 feet above the limit, and we're unsure right now whether or not the additional height is necessary. Additionally, the co-location that's requested. Right now, the site contains 4 carriers, and the proposed project would allow a total of 8 carriers on site. Staff is concerned that there may be a potential for overconcentration of co-located telecom facilities on site. And also with the co-location, it would allow some of the existing 4 carriers on site to move from one of these higher priority locations to the false tree, which is a lower priority location. And based on the information in the application, the coverage needs are not, staff feels we're not really demonstrating the need for the 62-foot height for Verizon Wireless, and the information was not provided to demonstrate what future carriers may be there, what their needs would be. And it is also not able to tell right now whether or not approving the application at a lower height would result in a denial of service. So the location category, the height, co-location, and coverage needs are some of the concerns that staff has.
Yes. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Hill.
Does staff have the capability of making findings on whether or not range and frequency and capacity and all those types of technical issues are present or not?
Mayor Pro Tem Hill, in conjunction with the review of the application, the applicant does submit coverage maps that show and varying heights of the structure in terms of the coverage, and they are provided as part of your packet. And one of the concerns with the software is it doesn't provide a lot of distinguishing factors that you can, by just looking at these coverage maps, to really be able to distill the difference between a 62-foot high structure versus a 58 or a 50-foot high structure. And so, when we looked at the exhibits that were provided to us, it was very clear that, for instance, the upper Newport Bay is clearly served by all of the different variations in the height. However, some of the outlying areas, it was more difficult to distinguish, and I think the applicant can amplify the limitations of the software. I think the primary concern that we're having is as part of this application, Verizon is the proposed carrier, and the 62-foot height mono eucalyptus is designed so that it can accommodate 3 additional carriers. We don't have any service needs or information on what height those 3 additional carriers may need, and so we are feeling that we are creating the potential for future carriers to locate onto this structure, but we don't know exactly what their service demands are. And as Fern indicated in her presentation, some of the existing carriers that are already located either in the cross structure or on the building itself may relocate to the mono-eucalyptus, which is, as Fern indicated, a lower priority in terms of where cellular antennas should be located. So there's a lot of different factors that we've been struggling with as we reviewed this application. We are hoping that to get direction from the City Council regarding this type of structure. We have identified some design options that, if the Council were interested in, could be pursued further, and there is a slide up before you on the monitor indicating some different options that the Council may provide direction. We've also included some recommendations to potentially look at some lower heights and maybe reduce the number of future carriers that could locate on the structure. And here's an exhibit that we put together showing the difference in bringing it down to the 50-foot height limit. So there are a lot of options for Council's consideration. If you want to proceed and you are satisfied with the proposed mono-eucalyptus tree at its current height, we could come back in 2 weeks with a full range of conditions of approval to address the concerns, including the planting of trees and so forth, or we can provide direction to both staff and the applicant to come back and look at some further design options.
Do we have other freestanding or whatever that are this tall in the city?
This is the first false tree application that the council has seen. There are existing monopoles. There's one on Camelback, but the grade is a lot lower there, and so from the street it's harder to see, or they're screened from with buildings and trees that are already there. And then, of course, there's a few in Signal Peak and Newport Coast that were there prior to annexation.
Right.
But there aren't very many that are on monopoles or on freestanding structures, such as a false tree.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, how you talk about the priority of location, how are those established? Who established them?
The City Council established them when they adopted the telecom ordinance. It's part of the municipal code in Title 15. And the purpose of it was to locate telecom facilities in the higher priority locations based on other city guidelines. And the first priorities are existing buildings that are screened from view. So if it's an existing commercial building and it's behind a parapet, you can't even tell that the telecom facility is there. And then other stealth facilities, such as the cross that is on the site here, or there's some architectural features such as bell towers or clock towers, something like that. And then new false trees, new standard monopoles, new lattice towers, those are lower priority locations because of those are more visible and not as appropriate for the city.
Mr. Hinton. Yeah, do we have any information regarding how well these faux trees maintain over time in terms of their ability to maintain an appearance that's lifelike?
Councilmember Henn, I'll go ahead and address that because that is given my age, I've had the experience of being in other jurisdictions and also just being very sensitive to faux trees, and I think that over time they do have the potential to frankly not age well. The foliage can fade over time, and I've seen situations where faux trees have been added to, where they've extended the height, and the extension doesn't match the lower portion of the faux tree, and so you have a very disconnected look to the actual structure. We have been talking at length with the applicant about appropriate maintenance for this tree, and they have agreed that they would have a very aggressive and ongoing maintenance schedule and ensure that the leaves do not fade over time, that they don't, since they don't grow back if they were to come off of the structure, that they would be replaced in a timely fashion so that it would maintain its appearance through the life of the structure.
So you would handle that through conditions?
We would handle that through conditions. That's correct, sir.
There's no other questions for staff. Let me invite the applicant to come forward, and if you have any comments to make. Evening.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is James Rogers. I'm representing Mobility LLC, the applicant. And, first, Mobility is not a wireless carrier. They are, I call them a commercial real estate developer who works with vertical assets instead of horizontal, meaning in their developments they have towers, which may be trees, or they may be some other type of tower, bell towers, whatever is appropriate. It may be a monopole, or it could be a building rooftop or a building facade that they then, manage the rights to and then lease out to the wireless carriers. That's generally what they do. What Mobility has been proposing is as staff explained, a 4-carrier wireless facility, something that carriers can co-locate on. Verizon Wireless is the first tenant, the anchor tenant, if you will, who happens to get the choice spot. In this case, the height. Verizon has not asked to be at 59 feet. But for a co-location to work, you have to have a certain vertical separation between sets of antennas. So if you start with, in this case, the lowest one, which is at 37 feet, so it clears the church building, and then start putting the size of the antennas and put the separation in there, you end up at 59 feet. And, that's why the height of it. It's not a matter of Verizon is asking for it or any one of the carriers is asking for it. It's just a matter of you putting 4 carriers on one facility, you have to stack them up to a certain height. The facility there, there are the existing wireless facilities there in the cross and on the church building, primarily because this is the only non-residential zone and use in the entire area. And I looked at also what else is available in the area, looked at the nearby school up the street in Costa Mesa. That wasn't workable. Looked at the YMCA and the commercial office buildings on University. For various reasons, they're not usable, both for just location too far to the north, and plus just the terrain dips down, so you're down lower, and you start running into that problem. Where we got the 4-carrier design is Mobility has, and we submitted as part of our original application, letters of intent or interest from 4 carriers who want to locate there. Verizon, Metro PCS, T-Mobile, AT&T. Staff has some concerns because T-Mobile and AT&T are already at the site. They're located where their antennas are at, say, 25 to 30 feet in height, stuck on the sides of the buildings. The church has expressed some interest in being able to remove those off the exterior of their building and frankly clear up all the clutter that's there. AT&T and T-Mobile are interested because at the height that they currently have, they are providing service to the area, but as they expressed to me actually today, it's marginal at best. It's not a denial of service, but it's marginal where they have continuous complaints from their customers in the area, and they cannot provide the quality of service or the service that people are expecting today that 5 years ago was not an issue. You know, today, voice phone work is the least used of your cell phone. Data, texting, internet, that's what people use it for. And they want to be able to use it wherever that they're at, including their homes. And at least 2 of the carriers who are currently there are not able to provide that to their customers. Staff made kind of 3 recommendations, and I just want to address those real quickly. About increasing the cross height, the existing cross to a height of 50 feet. Problem with that is that cross belongs to Sprint. It's not something that we have any say into. It's not something the church has any say into. Sprint has no interest in moving. They haven't contacted us about co-locating on the mono-eucalyptus. And we looked at what it would take to actually replace that church cross to something where everybody could accommodate the carriers there. Now, staff said a church cross of 50 feet. Unfortunately, 50 feet doesn't work. To get the church cross up there that will accommodate everybody, we're looking at 75 to 80 feet. And with a massive wingspan, and in our minds, that simply was not feasible, and we addressed that in our design alternatives in the application. They talk about modifying the church building, and I would rather the, say, representatives from the church address that. But, you know, myself, that seems impractical to basically design a church to better function as a wireless facility than to function as a church. And so, you know, I think that's something that we really don't want to get into. And then as far as the freestanding towers, a bell tower, a cross tower of some sort, again, you know, staff indicated 50 feet. And the problem is 50 feet simply does not work for the height to get a multi-carrier site there. Additionally, a 50-foot a tower, wherever it's located there, is going to have more mass to it than the eucalyptus trees. And so, you know, so our feeling was, again, that's not a good alternative because we felt it was going to create more visual impacts rather than less.
Thank you. I think we have some questions for you here. Councilmember Gardner.
If the tree were 50 feet, could you only have 1 carrier, or could you have 2 carriers instead of 4?
I'm going to give you.
Feasible first, and then we can talk about the economics.
Well, the economics, you know, that's another issue, and I'm not really concerned about that. I'll let the mobility people be concerned about it. As far as a function, I'm told that you know, 1 for sure, maybe 2. And, you know, the trouble is not always knowing who the two are, because the carriers all work on different frequencies. Certain of the carriers, say, cohabitate very nicely together. Certain of them, not so nicely, because their frequencies are too close to one another, so you actually have to have more separation in order to not have any signal interference between the two of them. So that's why I'm going to say maybe 50 you could get to, maybe not. I think that's why in the, say, the alternative options that we passed on to staff, if we had to drop it down, you know, we were looking really at 56 feet, 57 feet, something in that range that would be workable and still, you know, provide a workable multi-carriers facility. And I know you also asked about the setback.
Yeah, well, we'll ask you questions as they come up. Your time's expired. Are there any further questions for the applicants? All right, thank you, sir. Are there any further speakers who'd like to come forward? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Barr. I am a member of the Board of Trustees of Harbor Christian Church. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. Just to clarify from a few technical standpoints about the proposed installation, one thing that's important is that what we have been told in reviewing the application is that a number of the current cell lessees on our site are interested in co-locating, although there are maybe some technical issues with some of that. The key thing here is that what this site represents is the turn to 4G LTE, which is long-term evolution. So the term long-term means that these issues with some of the frequencies, some of the older types of systems that are in place will, over time, evolve into these systems that will be resident on the tree. So it will be attractive as the technology moves forward to these other carriers. We also know that this is a very, very competitive business, the telecommunication business, and it is in the process of somewhat down-selecting. You know, some of the carriers are in financial trouble, not to name any of them, but in the long-term evolution, there will be fewer carriers. There may be 4, there may be 5. But in my opinion, the way this is designed, it's highly unlikely that there will be 8 carriers on our site over a 5-year or 10-year period. That this site will allow us, as some of the other carriers co-locate into the tree, to clean up some of the older antenna styles which are currently resident on our structure. So this is a very attractive thing for us. The income that we derive from these cell carriers is very beneficial for us, for our ministry, both locally and abroad. A fair percentage of it we use for outreach, both in the local community and abroad, as I said. And so we also depend on it to finance some of our youth ministries, including our youth pastorship, which is in there. So this is a very important endeavor for us to continue to be able to host these sites, host these cell sites. And we see, it's pretty clear to us that there's a reason why they're there. We have a fair number, as you know, on the site. That's because the site is in an advantageous area to get coverage for the community that provides cell coverage, internet coverage, as well as emergency coverage.
Thank you. Other speakers, please come forward.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name's Jack Golden. I'm also one of the trustees for Harbor Christian Church, the host site for this proposed project. We're a small congregation, but we are big on community service, everything from handing out water to people on the trails across the street at the Back Bay, to significant donations of food, money, school supplies, etc., to local shelters and soup kitchens. We tithe our income to other ministries, including local, regional, national, and international relief funds. We look formally upon the cell tower installations as another way to improve community service by helping provide better cell service to the community. The income the church receives, as Mr. Barr said, helps us with our ministries, but it also keeps our physical plant in a safe condition and to keep our maintenance and capital improvements up to date. This is also very important to the community because we host the Jewish congregation Temple Isaiah, a Korean congregation Salim's. We have a kindergarten and preschool on site. We have many weddings at the church, both of members and non-members. We have community groups that use our fellowship hall, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, quilters, painters, and any group that's interested is welcome to come out on site. And because of this cell income, they come onto a very safe site because everything is kept in excellent condition. We're very much in favor of the project moving forward, and whether the height's 52 or 62, we believe that conditions can be imposed that will make it be workable and make the aesthetics, as you've seen with some of the viewscapes, and it's an excellent question, is it going to start out as a 10-foot tree or not, and that hasn't been addressed, but I do not know, but I think by putting the faux tree in with real trees, it can be aesthetically non-offensive. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before you tonight, and I can't resist. Finally, I have to say, can you hear me now?
Thank you. Other speakers, please.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosher. My selfish interest would be to tell you to go for this, as it would relieve the pressure for additional cell sites to be placed on city property in front of my home, but I really can't tell you that this is the right thing to do. This is the Back Bay. It is our nature reserve. It is in the coastal zone, and this is on one of our designated scenic roads. The applicant assures us that a fake tree with as many as 48 large antennas sprouting from it is going to blend in with the existing trees. But as their own simulations reveal, you can try to hide this, but this does not look like any of the trees that are on the site. Those of us familiar with Newport Beach know that this is trying to simulate an upright blue gum eucalyptus. It's nothing like the eucalyptus trees that are there. In fact, this to me resembles nothing more than a giant upright toilet bowl cleaner. And I don't think that you want to be remembered as the council that sanctioned a giant toilet bowl brush on a scenic road. Their coverage map, which is on the page before that, shows this big red area. If you look carefully, the area where they're having trouble seems to be mostly the water area of the upper or extreme Back Bay. And reading the staff report, it was discounted here by the applicant, but I would suggest that the Bay Corporate Plaza, which is just north of the Moose Center, would be a more appropriate site for something of this sort if it was needed. It's out of the way, and the staff report says that Verizon needs additional coverage in Santa Ana Heights. That location would appear to fill in the water and take care of Santa Ana Heights as well. If something does need to go at the Santa Isabel site, I think a bell tower with antennas completely hidden from public view is a much more tasteful solution. Those of you who were here and listened carefully to the most recent development agreement compliance review for the Newport Harbor Lutheran Church at Upper Castaways would know that a new bell tower there is the solution for adding antennas. They have, like this church, a fake cross with antennas, and they're planning to add a bell tower, which to me is much more tasteful. Mr. Rogers said that there's something wrong asking these property owners to modify the design of their church to function more as a transmitter site than as a church, but that is a decision that they have already made. They are wanting this to function as a transmitter site, and I think you should insist that they keep it looking like a church, and it's quite technically feasible to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers, please come forward.
members of the council. My name is Eva Goodwin Noriega, and we live in Costa Mesa at 2412 Les Bar Way, which is approximately 3 blocks away from the Newport Harbor Christian Church. And because I've been on the board of my church, I'm very interested in finding out, well, how much is this income approximately that this church is receiving from being a transmitter station? Just to share that information with my own board, but also to know that we are being subjected in our neighborhood to the commercial interests of this church for their being able to maintain their church by doing this cooperative project with a corporation or several. And my second issue is, if you want to see what a faux tree looks like, go, I mean, people have already said this to you, but there is one at the corner of Harbor and Wilson that I, not knowing anything about digital cell phone towers, my husband and I were looking behind the Taco Bell, and we said, God, look at that weird tree. And we now know what it is. It's not very hidden. I mean, you can pick it out. So it's, I'm left with question how it would look blended in with the rest. So those are my concerns. I really would like to know how much they are earning for doing this, and where does one find that out?
Thank you. Are there other speakers? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment section of the hearing. Let me just ask the gentleman who represented the applicant to come forward. The question was asked exactly what type of trees, what's the plan for the trees that are proposed to be planted as a shield? What's the story there in terms of height?
Well, I don't know, Fern, if you can put up the most current photo simulation that shows the trees planted. You know, the proposed tree shown on there, or the faux tree, is 62 feet. The proposed live trees that we put in there they vary in height from generally in the 40 to 50 foot range. What size they would be when they're planted, I think that's one of the details that we were looking that would be working out in a landscape plan with planning staff. Certainly not 10-footers. I think we haven't, because we haven't worked out the full landscape plan.
Okay. Thank you.
They would be substantial, but not necessarily 50-foot when they're planted.
Great, thank you. All right, let me bring this back to council. Is there any additional questions or comments or a motion? Mr. Hill.
I'd like to make some comments. I've actually spent quite a bit of time on this. I've visited the site, I think, on 3 different locations. I've walked all the way around the site, and so I'd just like to make some comments almost at random, if you will. Number one, the existing church facility does have antennas planted on it, and it's not attractive at all. And so to be able to remove some of those antennas, and I'm approaching this purely from an aesthetic issue, I think would be advantageous. I have driven to Fullerton and looked at the only known, at least to me, existing fake eucalyptus tree in existence. And I think, and I have some slides that I took of it personally that I'd be glad to share later. I think the tree is actually very attractive down to the branch system, and we've held this discussion before. I think where it falls apart is, and you do have one slide, I think, that comes close to showing that, but where the single trunk comes up and it branches into the 3 trunks, at that location is where it falls apart. It looks like a big pipe with 3 pipes stuck into it. And when you get up into the foliage does do a good job of hiding the antennas. And I think if something, and once again, I'm only addressing the aesthetics, if something could be done at that transition from the single pole to the branching, that would help tremendously. Having said that, the difficulty as to where this pole needs to be placed to be in the correct proximity to the equipment and the correct proximity for what I'll define as broadcast, it is a standalone. There are no other trees around it, unfortunately. And so when you look at a picture of the site, you see a lot of trees, but unless you get at a certain angle, you don't realize that this one tree is out there at a location by itself. And so I think it is very important that additional planting need take place around the tree. And so I think that's one issue. The second issue that I see is that I'm not a botanist by any means. I'm not sure that the artificial tree is of the same variety as the trees that are on the site. And I say that because of the density of foliage and the location of foliage. Having said that, it might be possible that you would want trees of a different height around it so that it blocked that union section of the single pole transitioning to the 3 poles, so more of a landscape approach to the total installation. I don't have a problem with the installation if we could solve the aesthetic problems. I understand the concern over setbacks, but I don't see that that's an issue on the site. And if it could be blended in and some of these aesthetic issues could be resolved, I don't have a height issue because the other trees on the site are much higher and much taller than this particular tree.
Mr. Hill, it's your district. Do you want to offer a motion?
I'm not sure what to move. I guess the request is, do we move forward with this and ask staff to come up with conditions that would be appropriate? And I guess my shot from the hip would be to move that we do request staff to move forward with this and bring back what they feel are appropriate conditions to deal with the aesthetic and functional issues.
I'll second that motion, but yes, Ms. Brandt.
Thank you, Mayor Curry. I just have clarification on the height. Are you recommending that we come back with conditions at the proposed 62-foot height?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Selich.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask the maker of the motion to include one other item, and that is that before they come back with this, they engage the services of a landscape architect. I think where it falls apart is in the very comments that you've made, and you look at all of the information we've provided as well as the information given by the gentleman at the podium, and it's obvious that a landscape architect hasn't been consulted on it. And I think your issues could be well served if we had a landscape architect work on this with them.
Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
There are 2 ways to come into Newport Beach from the north. One is Newport Boulevard, and as I come in, I've got 50-plus foot displays of billboards for vodka, tequila, whatever it may be. And then there's coming into Newport Beach from Irvine Avenue. And the first thing that I see as I enter is the back bay, the upper Newport Bay. I'm invited to our community on a nice, windy, scenic road that does come by this church with very, very nice eucalyptus trees. And it is the way that most folks that I know bring visitors into the community. I don't believe that a 62-foot metal structure trying to be hidden in amongst these trees adds to that experience. We're talking about making Newport Beach a great place, and that doesn't seem to me to smack of greatness. Secondly, if I look at this, the opener is for a more than 20% increase, exceedance of one of our standards on the come. We have one provider right now, Verizon, that wants to locate there. Yet we would be providing the capacity by exceeding our own standards by more than 20% for something in the future. That would be like saying, let's approve a retail center for 20% more square footage when we don't have a tenant, but just for the size of the building for something into the future. I don't think that that is in our interest either. I'll leave it at that. And for those reasons, I don't think that I can support
Thank you.
the motion.
Councilmember Gardner.
I agree with Councilman Petros. We have a telecom policy, and this flies in the face of most of it. We're taking one of the least attractive choices that we can. I think that there are other options. There are other locations that we can do it. I think that the tree is very ugly. I don't see how you can disguise that, so I will not be supporting the motion.
Okay. I would offer these comments. First of all, Mr. Mosier referenced a city site on that side of town. I thought that actually was a good site. Maybe we should put that site back into consideration for solving this problem as well. The issue is that with the exponential growth of telecommunications, if we want to have a city where people can get texts and get email and get web access on their cell phones like everybody does, and have uninterrupted cell phone service, we have to have infrastructure to do that. And for better or worse, the cell phone infrastructure, or the cellular infrastructure, was built out privately. It wasn't built out publicly. And it had to be done in using facilities like this in order to provide the capacity so that we can be, so that we have access to the web in our community. It's like not laying gas pipes or not laying electricity because we'd have to dig up a street. Sooner or later, your city no longer is providing modern services. And so this is one of the necessary evils of urban life, is to be able to have, is the requirement to have these until technology changes and it all comes by satellite somehow. So I support the motion to bring this back. I think you heard some of the discussion today, and there are some concerns by all of us up here about the aesthetics of this that we need to work with the applicant on to address.
Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I would like to accept the addition to the motion that was suggested by Councilman Selledge.
Okay, and I'll accept that too. Mr. Selledge.
Yeah, well, I'm going to support the motion for the reasons that you stated, Mayor, but I think the aesthetic concerns that were raised are valid concerns, and I've seen a lot of these fake tree cell towers around Southern California, and the thing that strikes me about the ones that really look bad, they're the ones that sit out by themselves. I think having one like this sitting in a grove of eucalyptus trees enhanced by other landscaping will help it blend more into the background, and it won't be the kind of eyesore that I think that some folks might think that it would be. And quite frankly, I can't think of a more perfect place to put it than in a grove of tall eucalyptus trees if you're going to try and hide something.
Very good. Mr. Hinn?
So I'm going to support the motion, but only reluctantly, and I really want to see what comes back with this in terms of the additional landscaping and the appearance issues here, and I'd like to make sure I understand the maintenance conditions on this too. So my support for this motion to bring it back should not be construed as support for the final motion. I want to see what we get.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further comments, please vote.
With Councilmember Daigle recusing herself and Councilmembers Gardner and Petros voting no, the motion carries 4-2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is item 22, initiation of an amendment to the Coastal Land Use Plan and Council policy establishing the encroachment program for East Ocean Front. We reviewed this in study session earlier. Is there a brief report?
Mayor Curry, before we move on to that item, for the previous item on the mobile T application, we're recommending that it be continued to March 26th because we do have to address the landscaping plans and get those put into motion. So I just want to.
Is there any objection to that? All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So now we're on the East Ocean Front encroachments.
Yes. As was mentioned, this is a continuation of the study session item, and it was, as was recommended by staff, we were asking the City Council to initiate the amendment to the Coastal Land Use Plan as well as City Council Policy L12 to amend the policies to allow for us to create the encroachment program. That concludes my presentation.
All right. Questions, comments? Mr. Hinn, this is your district.
Yeah, I'm going to move the item as recommended by staff on the basis that while I agree and understand from the prior conversations that there's a lot of unanswered questions here, I think we do need to have a construct to move forward with in order to get all the answers that we need. And so I think this is as good a construct as we can have. It is a construct, as I understand it, that is not based solely on staff or the applicant's point of view here. I mean, we have had some conversation with coastal staff about this. So my understanding is that we're not just shooting in the dark on this, and that there is some prospect that something like this might gain approval. And we will get another crack at this if it comes back before we take any action to really spend serious money here. I'm assuming we will get another crack at this before we get to a juncture where we're spending serious money to pursue it. And so I'll move the item as recommended on that basis.
So motion, is there a second?
Second the motion.
Motion second. Is there further discussion? Mrs. Gardner.
I have a real concern moving ahead at this point. I mean, I think the idea of bringing it into line with the West Newport program, I have no problem with that. I mean, the 15 yards and all that. But something that makes me very nervous is the word restoration when it's coupled with the Coastal Commission. And I'm thinking that the more we go down this road, we may be tying ourselves into something. I would rather have us know up front, before we take step one, what the Coastal Commission considers a restoration. I mean, maybe it's just taking the ice plant out of there. Great, that's easy. But maybe all of a sudden, knowing how these agencies are, remember how we started with the John Wayne Gulch project, and it was just going to be, a little bit of water moved, and pretty soon we've got a turtle restoration project in there. So I just think that we'd be better off following up on Councilman Selich's idea of having their biologists come down and make sure that we're not opening a can of worms that we can't close once we've opened it. Not that we wouldn't do it, but we might take a different approach if we knew up front. So that's my concern.
Thank you. Mr. Selich.
Yeah, well, I agree with Councilwoman Gardner. I think that taking the step to initiate a local coastal plan amendment is premature. I think we need to have further consultation with the coastal staff. I can tell you from my own personal experience, the word restoration has significant meanings to the Coastal Commission that can take you down paths that you don't anticipate, and you're sorry you get there. And you better do your homework very early in the process with these folks before you start initiating coastal plan amendments and things of that nature, as well as getting into the cost aspects of this. This could end up being a big black hole for us, and so I'm very concerned about it. So I would not be in support of this. In fact, I would offer an alternative motion that we not accept the staff recommendation, but that we direct the staff to ask the Coastal Commission biologists to come down, visit the site, do a site survey with the staff, determine what restoration means to the Coastal Commission staff, determine the extent of the area to be restored, and come up with some type of cost estimate and budget, not only for the restoration plan, but for doing this entire project, so that we have an understanding of how much money is going to be spent on it, and then we can make some intelligent decision in terms of what cost sharing, if any, there's going to be between the city and the residents out there.
I'll second that.
And Mr. Selich has made an alternative motion, and it's been seconded. We need to have public comment, but Councilmember Daigle.
Mr. Mayor, if I may get a little bit more background on kind of what the two proposals are here.
Certainly, the city staff is suggesting developing an encroachment program for West Ocean Front. It's similar to what's East Ocean Front, for East Ocean Front, similar to what's already in place on West Ocean Front. And the initiation or creation of the program requires us to amend our land use plan and our city council policy. So there are other steps involved, which involve the Coastal Commission. So what's being discussed is whether or not we include the initiation as the first step, or we go to the Coastal Commission first to find out what's involved in the restoration efforts that will be required for us to do as part of the effort. So either approach is certainly doable.
Okay, is there any shortcomings to having consultation with the coastal staff?
No, that'd be the first step in our process anyways, and we could come back to the City Council with information related to the restoration efforts, and then ask for the initiation at that time if it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions for staff, let me open up for public comment. If there's anyone from the audience who'd like to comment on this matter before we vote.
Mayor and members of the City Council, Jim McGee, I represent a significant number of the homeowners that live on the ocean front at Peninsula Point. I was here at the study session earlier today. I presented a comprehensive letter to the City Council that outlined a proposal that would seek to resolve the issues that are before the Council. Commenting on the alternative motions, what strikes me is that there is no option here to not come to some agreement with the Coastal Commission. So it's not a situation where you can look at it and say, they're going to come up with a restoration plan and we don't like it, and so we're not going to do anything. The Coastal Commission has made it very clear in my meetings, in the meetings with the city staff, that if we choose to do nothing, they're going to proceed forward with their notices of violation and legal enforcement, which will include the city as the landowner of the property on which the encroachments exist. So you really have two options. One is you go to the Coastal Commission and say, bring your biologist down and tell us what you want, and we're going to get something that's going to be very unacceptable, probably to both the city and to the residents, because they're going to give you a wish list of everything that they want, and we know what that looks like when it comes from Coastal. The other way, and this was actually suggested by enforcement staff during our meeting, they said, come to us cooperatively with a comprehensive proposal, make it something that looks like what you have for the West Newport encroachment policy that we have previously approved, and tie it up in a bow and relieve us of the obligation to try to legally enforce all the notices of violations. And if it's not unreasonable, we're willing to discuss it, and we're going to talk to you about it, and the chances are we're going to move forward with it. To me, that seems infinitely more reasonable than trying to ask them what they want and hoping that they're going to come up with something reasonable, which likely is not going to occur. In the process, as has been mentioned, we can bring a proposal to them with the idea that it's supported by the city, it's supported by the residents, it's going to resolve the legal issues associated with enforcement. There may be some give and take in that negotiation, but we're going to end up with something that they've already signaled to us is going to be close to what we're looking for, because they know what West Newport already has, and because the proposal that we put in front of the council is very, very similar to West Newport. And it solves a lot of problems for the city because it creates a uniform policy throughout the city. Right now, the only portion of the city that doesn't have an oceanfront encroachment policy is Peninsula Point. This problem will be solved. We'll be able to deal with issues that have been in existence for many, many years, and in a way that creates income to the city and gives the city the opportunity to take that income and I think use some of it to reimburse the city for the expenses it incurs as a result of coming up with the plan, doing the CEQA documents, the environmental review, and actually any of the restoration that might be required. So I would urge the city to go forward with the plan that's been recommended by staff. We've thought through it. We've met with the Coastal Commission. We've come up with this plan, and it is one that is really one that was asked for by the Coastal Commission. And I think if you move forward with it, you're giving them what they want, and we're going to end up with something that's much more doable, much more acceptable to the residents and to the city than if we go in the other direction and start all over and ask them what it is you want. Thank you,
Mr. McGee. Any questions from Mr. McGee? Councilmember Gardner.
No, just a comment. I think you made some very good points. I think there is a problem, which I hadn't considered, of asking them first and having them create that. So I withdraw my second.
Okay. So then...
Mayor Curry, I had a question, too, for Jim.
Jim, come back, please. Councilmember Gardner has a question. Then we'll come back and we'll...
Question for you, Mr. McGee.
Yes.
Your clients, my constituents, are they on board with this proposal?
They are.
Okay.
Now, I don't represent every homeowner.
Yeah, what's your
But what I do, what happened and the way that the group came together is they published emails to one another, they went door to door, and they solicited a group that was willing to financially commit to a particular position. Some people, not surprisingly, decided that they weren't willing to do that. But the ones that were willing are probably the spokespersons for the community, and they are all on board. We've gone through an exhaustive process to come up with a proposal that is a compromise, and we've all decided that the definition of that compromise is that everybody is equally unhappy with it. So it tends to be a good compromise that they will support, and if the city supports it as well, then we're going to be going to the Coastal Commission united in the idea that this is what we all want, and I think that that's what the Coastal Commission wants. They don't want to have to go through this enforcement procedure with a lot of different opinions and trying to deal with each one individually. I think that they want something that's very uniform and supported by both the city and, if not all the residents, at least a significant number of residents.
Okay, so a fairly cohesive group out there.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Selich.
Yeah, let me try and get my second back.
Well, you want to finish public comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Is there any further public comment? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Mr. Selich, have at him.
Yeah, well, I think my issue is initiating the local coastal plan amendment without getting this other information. That's typically what you would do in most instances, is gather this information, get an idea what the cost is, and move it from that approach. I don't think there's any substantial difference between what he was talking about and what I was talking about, other than getting this information before we initiate the local coastal plan amendment. So, is that enough to get you back, or no?
No.
No, I thought that his point of having the agency come down and say, well, here's your restoration plan, could open up a vaster restoration than if we said, here is our restoration plan, and we start to negotiate from there. Once we've asked them to suggest or tell us about the restoration, then we've sort of bought into that level already. So that was convincing to me.
Yeah, well, there's some validity to that, but again, to actually initiate the local coastal plan amendment before you have the information of what the plan is, how much it's going to cost, I don't know that everything he said is correct, that the Coastal Commission is going to come in and lay the whole burden on the city on all this. I don't know that.
Well, it appears as though Mr. Selich's motion fails for a lack of a second. I will make my own comments, is that I do believe Mr. McGee made a compelling case today. We have unpleasant options all the way around, I think, in this situation is where we are. And I think the staff approach that's been recommended here and has been worked out in conjunction with the property owners in Peninsula Point does the best to align the city with our residents in this ongoing negotiation that's going to occur with the Coastal Commission, and for which we ourselves are going to bear a little bit of liability, I suspect, as this issue goes through. So I, based on, frankly, Mr. McGee's comments, like Councilmember Gardner, have become convinced that this is probably the best strategy in the best interests of our residents to pursue. So I would be supporting the original motion. Is there any further discussion?
One further comment.
Mr. Hinn.
When we do the analysis here, when we get to a point where we start to develop some cost estimates, I'd like to understand those cost elements broken between the 15-foot city right-of-way and the rest. Because, my suspicion is that in some cases it's way beyond 15 feet, and we're going to want to understand that before we try to decide who pays what percentage of this.
And you would be in charge of that anyway through the budgetary control process, that we'd bring something to you and...
I'm just saying, to organize the information up front to do that. So.
All right, if there's no further discussion, Mr. Hill.
Well, I would just like to add that I think the discussion that's been taking place is really a discussion on when and how to mitigate your risk in dealing with the Coastal Commission. And I think the unique element here is that we already have an approved plan in part of town. And if we can mirror that approved plan and apply that and have a cohesive group, I mean, we're going to, the risk is going to hit us when they start to define restoration. But we might have it more under control by doing it later instead of sooner. I agree with that, so I will support the motion.
All right, seeing no further discussion, please vote.
The motion carries 6-1 with Councilmember Selich voting no.
Thank you. Item 23, initiation of an amendment to the zoning code to modify the minimum lot area density standard for mixed-use zoning districts.
Mayor Curry, this is our last item from the Community Development Department this evening. But Planning Manager Pat Alford is going to give an overview of a proposal to initiate I believe, a fairly minor amendment to the zoning code to address some concerns that we've been seeing at a staff level.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, when the general plan was updated, it included a number of new mixed-use land use designations, and those designations, along with the corresponding implementing zoning districts, establish a minimum residential density. We're finding now that we have the code in place that on some smaller properties, they're having difficulty meeting the minimum residential density. When you look at the minimum amount of non-residential floor area they provide, and the parking for the minimum residential and the minimum non-residential, it's difficult to fit all that on some of these smaller parcels. And so what we're proposing is that you give us direction to return with an amendment that would allow some flexibility in either modifying or waiving that standard.
Okay. Are there any questions for staff?
Yeah, assuming we go forward with this, I'm going to want to see a bunch of examples that support why this is difficult on some of these smaller properties and what we're giving up by doing this. And so I'm assuming you'll come back with a variety of examples and thoughts about that.
Any other questions? Let me open this for public comment. Is there any public comment on this matter? Being none, I'll bring it back. Is there a motion?
I'll move the item.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, please vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Item 24, the decommissioning and interim use of the existing City Hall property at 3300 Newport Boulevard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. As Dave Webb prepares the presentation, we have Dave and Dan Matiszewicz here for comments and questions. But for the audience's edification, this is a plan to maintain the old City Hall site, as we're calling it, during the interim period between when the new development proposal, whether that's a boutique hotel or high-end residential, comes back to you. And just as an update from that, remember there are 3 firms that have been selected under each parallel track of boutique hotel and high-end residential, and there was a walkthrough on Friday with them all. They all participated in that, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for the project. So we're going to talk next about what happens in between.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. This is kind of a continuation of the discussion we started back in the budget hearings back in May of 2012, where we had some discussion on how we'd address this, and you included $100,000 in the current budget so that we could move forward with the decommissioning and closing of this facility. Basically, we're looking at a few things we have to take care of. There's general tasks. We have security issues with the existing facility. We have the facilities themselves, landscaping, utilities, signage, et cetera. And then we have the public parking lots, or the parking lots that serve the facility, to talk about. Current proposal, as we discussed, and your guidance was to keep the council chambers, the former council chambers, open, so we'll be removing the signage on it and keeping as a electricity and the gas, et cetera, to the building so that the public could use that as a community room, working through the arrangement process.
Have we had in the past a lot of community demand?
I believe we have a fair amount. Laura Detweiler's group does program that room occasionally.
Who does?
The Recs and Senior Services group.
Oh.
And I do... and I believe some HOAs want to use that, the West Newport folks. Also, we have interior quarters of this building, so we're going to have to do some exterior barriers, and this would be kind of examples of where we'd put like a chain link fence. We'd make it so that it's under the eaves so that people can't climb above it. The one right in this area location, I'm sorry, I can't get my arrow here. we would actually put a gate in this location so that people could access it and get through, and the others would be solid. We'd probably have to remove these shrubs in this area right here so we don't end up with any folks maybe sleeping or doing things in there we wouldn't want to have happen. We also, sorry, not guarding. We'd also need to take care of some of the exterior approaches to the, like the staircases, and there's also ladders to the roof. We would take these facilities off and
You're going to actually remove the stairways.
actually remove the stairways so that we couldn't get access to the second story. And we have a couple ladders up to the roofs that we'd take off, too, to keep people from climbing up. A lot of the exterior windows and doors, we'd want to put additional security measures in place. Typically, they'll put a screw through the window or something to secure it beyond just the normal window lock, and also the doors. We'll check the deadbolts and things, so make sure we don't have any problems with people getting in. And then we have landscaping both on the interior corridors and on the exterior. On the exterior, we propose to maintain that, keep the irrigation going, trimming, maintenance schedules. On the interior corridors, we'll basically behind the gates, we'll shut that down, we'll deprogram the irrigation controller so that lawns and things will not be maintained in there. And I think we're going to try to salvage as many of the trees and plants as we can before we lock it down. We also have a series of park benches around, tables that we'll probably remove, and some other miscellaneous items around that we need to secure. As for utilities for the building, we'll be cutting off the phone and the cable TV, and we'll have limited water and electrical and gas access to the facilities once they close down.
What would you put under the trailers after you remove them? Just put bark down? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Actually, I have a slide in that. We'd probably, if you choose to move that, that's one of the decision points tonight, if you want to remove those trailers or not. This is just the overview of the facilities. The brown would be maintained for water. The other, the purple and the green, would be shut off. They're separate meters, and the irrigations for the landscaping would be left on also. And electricity, we're going to keep the outdoor lighting going, council chambers going, irrigation controllers, all the other power would be shut off at the breakers. We'd shut it off there. You could activate it again for whatever reason if you needed to power up the building. Also on the gas, we'd keep everything off except for the council chambers.
What about maintenance of the council chambers? Will we have people cleaning the restrooms on a regular basis?
We would need to set, I'm sorry.
We will. We'll keep that, the contract will shrink down to that, yeah.
Also, some existing signage will need to be modified. We'll take the existing City Hall sign out front. We can take those parts off and keep those for spare parts for other signs. We'll store those. We have a wayfinding sign that will need to be modified to take off the City Hall. There's also some various plaques and things around that we'll need to salvage. Some of those will be relocated. Some will be just removed. And then, as Councilmember Selich, there's two trailers on the site that we would want your guidance, should we take them off or not. The community has occasionally talked about the aesthetic look of these trailers. This will be the Public Works inspection trailer and the planning trailer right out front of Newport Boulevard. You could remove these, and we could just put bark back, if you like.
What would we do with them? Just sell them, scrap them, use them someplace else?
We'd probably just scrap them. The value of removing them would be more expensive than trying to just demo them. We own all the trailers on site. There's actually two other ones. There's one over on the 32nd side. It's our HR trailer. And there's another trailer that's between the two buildings over against the employee parking lot, which is a building trailer. And those would stay in place.
Before you just jump to the concept of scratching them, we've discovered that there are manufacturers that refurbish and pick them up and, rip the skin off and put new skin on it and make it look great, and we might be able, for the cost of removing it, get rid of them.
We could surely explore that and see if anybody wanted to salvage them or take them for some low value. So we need your guidance on what you'd like to do with those trailers. Leave them now or go ahead and remove them now. And then the last item we want to talk about tonight is the parking. We talked a little bit about this last time, and we've gone a little further with that. Dan's with us tonight, and I believe Tim Downey's here also from Central Parking to talk a little bit about the parking.
Thank you, Dave. Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, I have will briefly review our interim parking recommendations. As Dave mentioned, Tim Downey and Mohammed Mansour are also here from Central Parking in case you have any technical questions about the parking recommendation. As you know, the parking recommendation would be an interim use option. We explored 3 options: no parking at all, except for the St. James parking. As you know, we have a reciprocal agreement with that church. We explored free parking and the opportunity loss of not allowing parking on the existing site is estimated to be about $125,000 over the first 2-year period, and then the additional loss for surrounding areas from the bleed from additional areas or that vacuum effect would probably be an additional $55,000 per year. And finally, the paid parking options, and the pro is that allows 110 additional public parking spaces available than currently available today, and the return on investment would be within 3 to 4 months, even if we installed 3 parking stations. So the lot would be configured with the same spaces as they are today. 155 spaces, 45 would be restricted for St. James, 20 spaces on Saturday, 45 spaces on Sunday. As we know today, currently Sunday, they use most of the lot. We would install 3 pay stations in the lot, same technology used elsewhere in the peninsula, and we would install approximately 15 to 20 additional meters on 32nd Street. And finally, upon completion, we would redeploy the equipment, so there really wouldn't be a loss on the investment. The parking configuration is as displayed on the screen. The St. James parking would be limited to this area, and the pay stations would be located in those areas. We looked at surrounding parking areas as a baseline for our estimates, with Lido shopping area being the lowest average monthly per space average, Cannery Village being the highest. We used a very conservative estimate of $50 per space monthly in developing our revenue estimates, and which resulted in, as we indicated in the first year, we would repay the equipment within 4 months, and which would produce $42,000 in the first year. And then in the succeeding year, after the expiration of the St. James lease or reciprocal agreement, we would start tracking at approximately $82,000 per year. With that, I would turn it over to any questions that you may have on the parking options.
Questions for staff?
I'd like to make some comments. We've obviously had some discussion on this before. Till someone convinces me otherwise, I am very concerned about formalizing this as public parking on an interim basis. I believe that the fact that whatever we do on that property will have to go to the Coastal Commission, and I guess I was shocked in conversations over the last couple of weeks to suddenly realize, my interpretation was that it's conceivable within 90 to 120 days we'll have a developer partner on board, and I was going to just turn that site over to them and have the city relinquish all of its responsibilities, and whatever needed to happen would be their responsibility and their cost. I'm realizing now that because of coastal permits, it may be 2 years before those buildings are torn down. And so if we were to activate this as public parking in 2 years, I could see the Coastal Commission coming in and saying, well, if you're going to develop that property, you got to replace those 150 spots or 110 spots or whatever they were or are. And today, my understanding is that parking is dedicated as business parking, and the business happens to be the city of Newport Beach. And I would like to see it remain commercial use, if you will. I would think that, in addition to St. James Church, there's the church that uses the Lido Theater, and the reason our lot is filled every Sunday is not because of beach parking, it's because of the church. And so I would look at negotiating a lease with that church. I think there are other entities, business entities around that would be interested in leasing a portion of that property. And maybe we could negotiate that lease, that the lease price was maintenance and security, that they would provide the maintenance and security in exchange for using that lot. I would just hate to see that lot go to public use and have the Coastal Commission come back around after all of our efforts and say you can't develop your property unless you provide public beach parking on that site. And so if you can convince me that that would not be an issue with Coastal, then I'm all for raising the income or collecting the money. But otherwise, the money to me is totally insignificant based upon the big picture of what we're trying to do here.
Mayor Pro Tem, we are hopeful and perhaps Pollyannic that the city could reach an agreement with the Coastal Commission. It seems consistent with their goal to provide public parking access to the beach, and if they had a clear understanding that this would be an interim use, that perhaps they would be agreeable to committing to an agreement.
Let me ask City Attorney if he has an opinion about this.
Well, I think the Coastal Commission is probably going to look at imposing conditions on the project anyways. I think that there's always a risk as far as creating that interim use. That the Coastal Commission would see that as something they'd like to make permanent.
Councilmember Daigle.
The city's done well in parking, and we're doing even better. So if we were to even expand within that lot, from what I just heard, you need a coastal permit to demolish buildings?
Well, you clearly need a coastal permit to demolish the buildings, and that's what Mayor Pro Tem Hill was discussing, that the strategy on our part is not to go to coastal with two separate projects, one to demolish the buildings, and then the other would be the applicant that we'd support with a new reuse, is to tie those together and bring those together all at once. I still struggle with this thought that we need a coastal development permit to put in pay stations at our own parking lot, and I agree with what Mr. Hill said, that this is not typically a beach parking lot. I mean, I could see if this was the Balboa lot or the Corona del Mar lot, this is a lot that people use to go to the theater, to go to the church, to get away from the Bialito Plaza little police guy. So I'm very comfortable making that case. I'm just me, and we're just the city going up against the Coastal Commission, but there's no demonstration that people use this to go to the beach.
Member Gardner.
I'm sorry, you weren't finished?
So with the trailers, though, when you clear out the trailers, does that make up more space available for parking or other uses?
No, it would be either wood chipped or grass.
Okay, but it could be paved.
I don't think you'd want to take the expense because the trailers aren't adjacent to the parking either, so that would be expanding the parking lot, and that would be additional cost you'd incur.
Okay. Another revenue generator that's going on out there, if you go to SoCo there in Costa Mesa, the Design Center, on weekends and other kind of parking lots are doing this, they're bringing in food trucks, kind of a weekend use, and renting it out, apparently making pretty good money, and it could sort of activate some energy in the area as well. Something to keep in mind.
We understand the concern of the Coastal Commission. I did talk with community development staff. We kicked that around, and there may be a way to look at this as if this is business parking. There are private parking lots around. People put it on their private lots. We just had one at 3200 Balboa that's now next to the Crab Cooker, next to Woody's. And that lot now turned into a development, and they didn't take that parking and include it as public parking. And maybe they could look at this as a business. It's not public parking. It's just an interim use. It might be something we could explore as a holding pattern.
Councilmember Gardner.
I'm with Councilman Hill on this, that we have to keep our eye on the big picture, and maybe isn't good enough. Now, I do think there's a great idea, though, of doing some deals, because, I mean, even maybe the theater doesn't need parking, but there are other organizations around there, some even need off-site parking, where we could at least, we might have some revenue, but we could make a very clear case that it wasn't public beach parking and not be caught up in that.
Mr. Urso, do you want to speak?
Well, I had some discussions with staff on this also, and I guess I tend to go along with Councilman Hill on this. I mean, I'm really concerned about what the Coastal Commission will do on this. I mean, I guess if they can come and when we want to remove a parking space in front of a business and say you have to replace it somewhere else, what's going to keep them from saying they want us to replace 140 spaces here? I'd almost take it a step further and just close it all down and not let anyone park there and just shut the whole site down, and then for sure we know we won't have a problem.
Well, I would add these comments myself, and then Mr. Petros. I park there a lot when I go to the restaurants, when I go to the film festival, when I just want to go, and I actually do go there because I can walk on the beach because I've got a spot. But I hope the public appreciates that the Coastal Commission makes us do dumb stuff, and this is an example of dumb stuff that's contrary to the public interest, because we've got 100 spaces that could serve our businesses and serve our visitors and promote our restaurants and promote the theater and revitalize the shopping center, and we're worried about Coastal Commission regulations that would make that disadvantageous to us in the long run to do. So, I support the parking concept. If the way to do that is to execute leases with the theater and the churches and the shopping center and others, maybe the restaurants, maybe that's the way to go, when we do a consortia and figure out how to handle that. But I just think it's a real lost opportunity, although I appreciate the concerns raised by my colleagues. Mr. Petros.
I think there's one other party that we're maybe missing here, and that's our potential future partner. Do we know what an encumbrance like this would do to the deal with either our residential or our hotel investor? I think that also throws something into the mix that would confound this. I also, Dave, would be interested, as you move forward on your security plan, vet this with the police department to make sure that all eyes are on this. And on the trees, I thought I heard you say that they would be boxed before we would be moving them. Get the arborist to chime in and see if maybe it's not best to leave them in situ before we figure out what the disposition of them is going to be, not box them, because that might shock them. So,
okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Henn.
Yeah. Well, first off, I don't want this facility to look like it's been shut down. That's just not a good thing. This is the gateway to the peninsula. I don't want we've had that property at South Coast Shipyards looking like hell for 2 years now. I don't want this one to look like an unused property. So I very much am supportive of the idea of maintaining it for use, the chambers, although I don't recollect that's the direction we gave staff last time we talked about it. I think it's a good idea to have some amount of activity at the site. And so even if we don't get a lot of use of the City Hall chambers, I think it's a good thing to have some use and to spend a few dollars to maintain it, to provide for that. Secondly, as it relates to the removal of the mobile home, of the manufactured housing, whatever you want to call it, that was just a little bit of rural Kentucky that I'll be glad to be rid of in Newport Beach. And beyond that, I don't think we should just do it on the cheap with bark. We ought to put turf down and just make it. It could be a couple of years before this situation really is redeveloped. And unless staff's going to come back and say it's going to cost megabucks to put turf down, I don't think they will. I'd rather just have some turf and, have some green grass there and make it look nice. Thirdly, this idea of chain link fence across the openings, I understand we need to have good security. I hope we can find a solution that's a little more aesthetic than chain link fence. And razor wire wasn't mentioned, but it's kind of evokes feelings like that from me. But, so if there's some way to, let's just try to be aesthetic about it, especially where there's sight lines that are visible, from the surrounding uses. I mean, it would be nice. As it relates to the parking, I share concern about the Coastal Commission. I'd hate for that to drive the whole rest of the decision-making here, though. I mean, if there is and again, it sort of plays to my view of having some sort of activity at the site, some usefulness. If there is a way to structure agreements with the church or the surrounding businesses here that, even for low dollar or whatever, I'd like to do that. I mean, Now, do I understand correctly that staff thinks that we have to go to Coastal to put up pay stations?
Well, I think there's a little disagreement. Coastal has required the state parks, they're going to pay stations with all their parking lots, but those are beach parking lots, and those require a coastal permit. I think they're going in March.
No kidding.
We didn't go to Coastal for our pay stations. I don't think it's any secret that when we transitioned to CPS a couple of years ago, and I want to stand firmly that this is not an issue for the Coastal Commission to weigh in on. But that's just my opinion. Attorneys may tell me otherwise.
Weren't we putting in meters we were just changing the kind of meters? Were there very many areas where we brought in new meters?
I may have to look. You guys remember, did we add? There were areas that we added or areas that we just converted?
All the areas were converted.
Okay, so no additions. I'm gonna say it's not.
All right. So if we took the idea of leasing some of this out to a business, so can you put that parking diagram up?
Sure.
That you had before? Yeah, so we'd be talking about the curved part, that would be something that would be leasing out to a business. The area in red would go to St. James Church, and then what the other little parking lot, that would go to service the council chambers? Yeah. Is that what we'd be doing?
Mm-hmm. You could generally do that. We'd have to figure out a means of controlling that, whether we do it through signage, for event staff only, or we put up signs that it's leased out to certain people. I think our real concern there is how do we control the parking so that we don't get general public using that instead of feeding the outside commercial meters in that zone and just coming in and losing revenue off the meters.
Well, that was kind of my question, is it almost seems like whoever we lease to would have to put some kind of gating system up on each end of the curve there.
Or have it monitored. I mean, once again, you write those into the terms of the lease.
I guess just thinking out loud, who out there in that neighborhood is interested in that kind of parking along with whatever expense comes with it? Well, have it right now.
For us to have no cost is a benefit to us. To have it secured, cared for, and no cost is a benefit to us. And so, just like with the dollar lease with St. James, if we could renegotiate that to say, since we're going to be off the site, we'd like you to also make sure that it's, that it's monitored, that it's swept once a week, that kind of a thing. And I think that the church that's in Lido would have an interest. I think that reserving part of it for ourselves, for the council chambers, once again, I think is an important part of the whole concept that it's not public parking. General public parking. So, I don't see it, I see it as lease language to deal with it and to avoid cost on behalf of the city. I'd also like to chime in with Mr. Hinn's comments, because this may be 2 years or something of that sort. When we pull those trailers out of there, the 3 of them, I think that should be resodded. And hopefully the irrigation system is still buried there and can be reactivated. And it shouldn't, we're probably talking about a few $100s to do that. And so if you don't want to put sod in, throw some seeds in and water it,
I guess I am concerned. I don't want to lose parking revenue in the surrounding metered areas either, so I do agree that's a problem. So, I don't know, I think we need to
Well, let me propose something to you again, just thinking out loud, that we spend a little bit, I think we have direction generally on everything else but the parking. I think the direction is to remove the trailers. I heard two people strongly feel that add the sod, and I'm seeing a couple of other heads nodding from that. And then as to the chain link, the concept is the netted chain link, probably that same blue color, the blue color that's around here a little bit. We'll try to make it look as good as we can, but we don't want people getting back there. There's just too many places to hide.
Well, I think the guidance on the parking is we're all for parking, but it needs to be done in a business plan that anticipates potential issues with the Coastal Commission to the extent possible tries to mitigate them.
And that was where I was going next. So we'll leave that silent for now, and we will do a little bit more research and talk with Coastal and get a sense of what our wiggle room is, and maybe some of the surrounding vendors that might be interested in that, and come back with you on something on that.
Dave, in the extreme, one possibility is sandblast the spaces out off of Findlay, red curb it, and it becomes a throughway. In the extreme.
A very wide bike lane. Yeah.
All right, let me open this up for public comment. We haven't done that yet. Is there anyone in the public who'd like to speak on this matter? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public comment. All right, do we need a motion on this, or do you have what you need, Dave?
I think we have what we need.
Okay.
We'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Next item is item 25, resolution related to the city's legislative platform, Washington, D.C. advocacy contract.
So, Mr. Mayor and council members, you have the staff report in front of you and a strikeout and underlined version of the proposed legislative platform. I'm looking through it. I see a few little typos I'd like to declare as Scrivener's errors to clean up. There's some A's and B's floating around that shouldn't be, and I would recommend that the last one, which is 6, Roman 6, should say water and environmental quality,
Right.
not just water environmental quality. But I'd certainly welcome your comments on things struck out or added, and note to the public, this also authorizes us to extend our DC contract with Van Scoyoc and Associates.
Councilmember Gardner.
Well, first of all, it seems to be that the resolution is misnamed. This talks about Washington, D.C. advocacy, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in here about state, which doesn't mean it shouldn't be in there, but Washington has nothing to do with some of the issues that are in here.
Where do you see that? Sorry?
Well, it says the resolution relating to the city's legislative platform, Washington, D.C.
There's a semicolon there. And the other should say...
So you're talking about two different things then?
Yeah,
I just thought you were talking
relating to the city's
about
legislative platform, semicolon, Washington, D.C. advocacy contract.
Oh, I thought you meant for him to be talking about all these things.
No. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Okay.
All right, well, I still have an issue then.
Okay.
On page 7, number F. Now, I know this is the Holy Grail, but I really do wonder. I understand why we all want to support Prop 13 as far as residential, because there are a lot of people that bought houses at a certain point and became property rich and cash poor, and there was a time when they were losing their homes or having to move because their property tax bills got so high, and that was the whole genesis of it. But I'm wondering why we as a city don't even want to consider the split roll where commercial properties would come into it. Again, I could see a social benefit to the city if we had a property that was under Prop 13 and he paid $100 in property tax, and his neighbor was not in Prop 13 and he paid $2,000 in property tax. I could see the social benefit if the person A charged $1 a square foot as opposed to the $10, say, a square foot that his neighbor paid. But in that way, we would encourage those small businesses and that were startups and everything, and give more variety and that sort of thing to those people who can't afford the kind of rents that you can if you're part of an organization like Starbucks. But in this case, landlord A probably charges the very same as landlord B. he just makes all the profit, but the city doesn't ever benefit from any increase in property tax because those don't change ownership as often. And it's not like the residential where you can't pass it on. Here, if there's an increase, you can pass it on to your tenants. So I'm wondering why we are opposed to even considering that.
I can respond to that. There's various organizations, BIA, that is including a no on split roll in their legislative platform. OCBC is also considering it. So it is an issue for commercial business interests in our county. And I suppose one could say, sure, you pass it on to the tenant, but I know I'm the tenant, and I'm not a big business. So I think there are also implications to other business people. So the reason for the opposition on split roll is to really be to represent our business community and our commercial development community.
I think there's an additional element in there as well, and in my discussions with those in Sacramento that are rather avid on supporting the split roll, also see it as the nose under the tent because their ultimate goal is to eliminate Prop 13 in total. And they'll give you every reason in every case why they feel that that's an unreasonable burden on government. And so I would be very supportive of keeping it just the way it is written.
Comments? Mr. Hinton.
Yeah, just on a different item, I don't have a problem that we don't have to revise this, or I guess there's an idea that we're not saying to ourselves we have to revise it every so often or whatever. I actually kind of like thinking about this once a year, where our emphasis is on our legislative advocacy. I don't mind, I'm not exactly sure what that comment was designed to achieve, to be honest with you. But I kind of like the idea of at least passing it by us once a year to get a little reaction.
Mayor Curry? There's also a Assembly bill coming forward from a San Francisco legislator, Paz, and that is that it's a homeless Bill of Rights. And what they're proposing is that homeless people would be entitled to camp out in public open spaces. So, for example, Sunset Ridge Park, they can go camp there, and they can put their stuff there. So how would the city, something like that could have a real impact to our community? I don't really see that specifically in this. I mean, is there sufficient latitude to send a letter on those types of bills?
Give me a minute or two I tried to make this broad enough to encompass things like that, but I'll keep listening to other comments and see if I can find the section that refers to that.
And then my other point was having some direct experiences with a lobbyist in D.C. I see several functions for them going forward. We've got to get through the West Newport dredging. They have very good relations with the Corps. Secondly, with the eelgrass, we may have ongoing issues with national marine fisheries, and clearly the lobbyist, while staff can do 90%, having somebody to come in 10% of the time and throw fastballs, I think, can really help with doing that. And I'd also note the congressional delegation was very helpful with the completion of the Upper Bay dredging, and we may want to provide some proclamations from them as well. And even Congressman Campbell, we ran into some real difficulty, and his staff ran interference for us. So those would be some of the ongoing uses for the lobbyist. And they also indicated that they may try to get some money. There's been an emphasis on levees because of Katrina, so who knows, maybe it's a long shot, get some seawall money.
Thank you. Any other comments? Let me open this for public comment if there's no other comments. Is there anyone in the public who'd like to speak on this matter? Please come forward.
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosier. I agree with Councilman Gardner that some of the issues that are in here would be regarded as contentious, especially this Proposition 13 split roll business.
And so we're clear, Jim, are you for or against the split roll?
I just think it's not appropriate for the city council to be adopting a position and claiming that they're representing the 86,000 people in Newport Beach.
On Proposition 13?
On the split roll issue, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I agree with Councilman Henn that this, where it applies is in the very first line under legislative platform. This proposes to say term indefinite. These will be our legislative platform forever since. I think this, if we have a legislative platform, should be reviewed frequently. The old one from 2007 was explicitly lasted only 2 years and then expired. And I think that's an appropriate time. 1 year also would be good. And then under that, where it says general platform issues in giant letters, this is not just a scrivener's error. It says the following 6 categories. These are these things: aviation, land use regulation, fiscal, etc., that those are supplemental to the above areas of focus. And there are no above areas of focus. The previous legislative platform in 2007 had, in addition to this list, it had the things that you really wanted to focus on and advocate called out at the beginning, and I think that was a good idea. And it clearly is inconsistent here the way it's written, and I think the old way with those really essential items at the top was probably better than it is this way.
Thank you. Any other public comments? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. Is there a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve it as recommended by staff, and then I like the idea of bringing it back again next year, too.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, the next item has to do with the establishment of a harbor capital fund. Mr. Kiff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. So both at your goal-setting session and the final months of 2012, you directed the Tidelands Management Committee to come back to you with a proposal to dedicate the incremental revenue associated with the changes in the harbor rent schedule to a specific fund for capital projects like dredging and seawalls within the harbor. So we have one slide we want to show you. Dan's at the screen there to show you how this might work. This has gone through the Tidelands Management Committee. We had a more extensive discussion about it, but up on your screen there it shows how base Tidelands, I'm going to call everything that we collect today, the base Tidelands revenue, and those are apportioned into operations, into capital, but capital which is ocean and harbor, and then an Upper Bay Restoration Fund. There's actually a Section 2 that goes to a small bit of money, it's about $85,000 a year, that goes to the State Lands Commission for their land bank fund. But what we would do is take, again, that incremental rental revenue, create a harbor capital fund. This would be a fund we're recommending to go to the State Lands Commission and get that fund established and blessed by the State Lands Commission. They wouldn't have any dealings with what we spent the funds for, except what's in the existing Beacon Bay bill. But it just give that imprimatur from the State Lands Commission. We think they'll be receptive to it. Certainly welcome your comments and questions about how this might work.
Well, I would just say this is a very important step in keeping faith with the community after having gone through the process of adjusting the rents, that we commit that we're using these funds for capital projects to the specific betterment of the harbor. We did adopt a 5-year, $29 million capital plan for the harbor, and this helps us get focused on the commitment to fulfill that capital plan during the time allowed. So I commend staff for bringing forward this recommendation as we requested. Are there comments? Councilmember Daigle.
I had a couple questions. First, I really appreciate the planning effort, and people had this awareness and recognition that we got to get our arms around this, and also the disciplined approach to sort of creating a lockbox of money, of funding. It's the first time I looked at it, so I did have a couple questions about the revenues, and so we have a 5-year phase-in, so you go from year 1 to year 5 in 2017. And then when I was looking at the plan that the funding goes into in 2017, it seemed to is okay. Well, no, what do we do now? And so, in looking at the kind of magnitude of capital needs in 2017, looking ahead, any thoughts on how we're going to address sort of hitting this wall or this seawall of $50 million or upwards of $50 million?
Good question, Councilmember Daigle. And yes, we've looked at this staff level, and I think the Tidelands Management Committee looks at this too, that there's no way the harbor rent revenue, incremental or otherwise, is going to pay for all the needs of the harbor. And there's no expectation that we should go back to those folks and say, well, you've got to pay more. The concept that the council directed us to pursue was fair market rental value, not higher than that. So we've looked at it, but there'd be three sources of money. One would be this Harbor Capital Fund. The other would be general fund money, or indeed other Tidelands money that would go to Harbor Capital. And then a third, which is a bit pie in the sky right now with the situation the state and federal government are in, but we will keep asking the state and federal government to help us, especially with the federal government's obligations to finish the dredging of the navigational channel. We'll look for state grant opportunities in the event we need to do this massive repair and reconstruction of our seawalls. So those three sources.
Okay, great. And then my final question was, and this may have already been discussed by the committee, people have thought it out and considered it, is the question of, since we're now spending something like 10% of our existing Tidelands revenue, what about sort of creating a lockbox with those revenues as well? That would be 10% of your parking and all that. So you'd have your new incremental revenues into the project bucket, and then within our existing Tidelands funds that we've been using for many years.
So
any discussion about
in
that?
other words, the thought would be that this revenue would supplement and not supplant existing revenue.
Sure.
So that certainly is how staff is approaching that. We could refine this as we go to the State Lands Commission to say that's the true intent. In other words, take the capital we're spending now, which is a little bit limited, the new money, and make sure that is, we never go below that.
Yeah, something to think about.
Expenditures.
Maybe people have.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Is there public comment on this matter? Let's see none. I'll close public comment and bring it back. Is there a motion? Motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Hinton.
Picking up on this comment that Leslie raised, we have a capital plan right now that is well in excess of the money that we're in effect sequestering here, and I think the main driver as I think about this is what that capital plan is. And so as long as we're being thoughtful about that and pursuing this capital plan, which, by the way, we wouldn't, it was never in my mind that capital plan would be set and then 5 years from now we'd have another look and try to figure out what to do. That capital plan really is something that needs to be reviewed and revised appropriately every year to keep it as a fresh document. So, I don't know, I guess in thinking about it, I'm okay to leave it the way it is in the motion, but others may have a view of that. So.
All right. If there's no further discussion, motion is to approve the item. Please vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Item 27 was put on the agenda at my request. As most of you who were at the mayor's dinner heard, I proposed some things, specific items for council consideration, one of which is a review of the municipal code with the idea that we would identify and eliminate unnecessary provisions that have accumulated over time, much the way we've cleaned up the city charter. A couple that come to mind are the fact that it's illegal to swim in the bay at Adams and Edgewater, that if you're going to go out of business, you need a city permit and need to pay a fee to do that. There are some other things, and some of you may have nominees for that list as well. So one of the requests here is to ask staff to bring back a nominee list of both ordinances which have outlived their usefulness and fees that are not appropriate any longer in our fee schedule that ought to be repealed. The second initiative is to set aside a portion of our development fee revenues, and my initial thoughts on this are about 2% of our negotiated development fee revenues as they come in, into a special fund that could only be used to fund permanent art improvements and projects, such as theaters, museums, permanent art installations. These are not for one-time things. These are for permanent facilities. Rehabilitating the theater on Cliff Drive would be an eligible project. The Balboa Island Museum would be an eligible project. Permanent, long-standing cultural facilities in our city. This is a process that is used in other cities throughout America, and I think is one that has great merit here. We are fortunate in that we don't need to build a big performing arts center. There's one in Costa Mesa. We don't need to support a symphony orchestra. There's one that plays in Costa Mesa. We don't need to do a lot of those big things, but what we do need and what we do lack as a community is a good community theater, is a museum of the caliber that they are projecting to have at Exploration, that have installations of public art that can be appreciated and enhance our community going forward. This does not, I'm not proposing, by the way, that we raise development fees at all, simply that we divert a portion of these discretionary revenues as they come in. Now, my colleagues may have their own thoughts about how that might be augmented going forward, so this gets on the table a proposal that we can talk about and then consider. Councilmember Gardner.
Well, I'm wondering if, as far as number 3, I know that our City Arts Commission is working on a master plan, and whether that might not be the starting point, rather than having it come from the city manager, have these people who are so involved in art make some suggestions as to...
Well, I welcome their suggestions on what we ought to fund. This puts in place a revenue stream that I think is more the purview of the City Council.
No, number 3.
Funding source. Funding source.
Well, I thought what's the difference between number 2 and number 3 then? Aren't you're talking about creating a fund?
Number 2 is the repeal of unnecessary fees. No. And number 3 is to...
Number 1 is unnecessary fees on mine. Are we looking at different... All right, so that's...
Should go in the order of laws, fees, and then art funding source. 1, 2, 3. Hopefully you have that staff report.
Number 1 is to review the provisions and repeal unnecessary provisions. Is that correct?
Of the code, so think laws and regulations.
Well, first of all, that seems to me that's a huge undertaking, isn't it?
We've done some of it already. We kind of keep our own list of things that seem outdated.
All right, so what is number 2 then?
Number 2 would be to go to the master fee resolution and look at, we charge some fees for some obscure things, and I'm really curious to know, I think the mayor was, how many of those we've charged like once in the past 20 years or 30 years, or just they don't pass the smell test, like the fee for going out of business?
Okay. All right, now I'm clear on it. I thought, for some reason, I was conflating 2 and 3, and that's why I was confused. Sorry. All right.
Councilmember Daigle.
Important distinction. So you're not talking about someone coming in, filing for a building permit, and it's 2% of that. You're talking about a negotiated development deal with a developer. They want to do a big project, get something extra.
Right. Now, we'll consider that, and we need, as a council, to decide some criteria for what this is spent on and how it's spent and precisely what it goes on. But the idea is not to charge an additional fee. It is to take a portion of the developer fees that out of negotiated developer agreements, 2% is sort of the openers, that may or may not be the right number, and fund that into the art fund.
Okay, so that's a negotiation. I support that. I would just have a problem with, a 2% out of everything, so that's fine.
Okay. Just to add a further thought, I completely support the idea that's been raised here with regard to the developer fees. I would like staff to think about, though, some sort of an annually recurring funding source for arts and cultural development in the city, because I think there are lots of programs that the success of which depend upon being able to plan against a regular source of funding. And so I see actually 2 pieces to the solution here. Furthermore, that second piece, that regular recurring source of funding, it will also help over time for the development and maybe the nourishment, if you will, of an arts community here in Newport Beach. And I think that's where you really start to get the permanency of cultural development and momentum in a community, is if there can be an arts community that's, got, that there's some amount of economic funding to support. I get to Chicago, and Lincoln Park has got a program in Chicago where they just spot art throughout the park. They put a little slab down, put a piece of art up, put a label on it. It changes every 90 days or every 180 days or whatever. It's a low-cost way, and I'm certain, I need to do some more research, but I'm certain that art is art that is produced within the community, the local community. So it gets back to this idea of arts community. And so I'd like to be able to think through some, a source that helps to promote that too.
Mayor Curry?
Councilmember Gardner.
One small thing that we could do to help would be to change the way we do our bookkeeping. So I know that's been a very big frustration, an ongoing frustration of the Arts Commission, is that they put on trips to museums and that sort of thing, very successful. They make money on them. But the way we keep, the way we track everything, somehow it ends up, they never get credit for that, but the costs of it come out of their budget. So they spend their budget, and they could be doing more things if we had a different kind of bookkeeping, I think. So it's a minor thing, but I think it's something that we could look at as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Selich.
Yeah, I'm in support of number 3. I also support what Councilmember Hent said about looking at some way to deal with this on an ongoing, recurring basis. We're not going to always, right now we're in a period of negotiating a lot of development agreements, but we're not always going to be in that position. So I think having something more sustainable and reoccurring on the long-term basis would be good. So I'd be in support of that.
Thank you. There's, Mr. Petros.
Curry, I also agree with Mr. Hand, and I would just point out that there is a vibrant art community that is based in Newport Beach. All you have to do is open up any society magazine and see the openings in Costa Mesa and who is attending those and who is supporting those, our neighbors. I think that by virtue of your initiative, we're going to start to see some investment back in our town for the good of our citizens and the arts. So I applaud this effort.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this matter?
Mayor Curry and members of the council, my name is Jim Mosher. With regard to arts and culture, I would be curious to know if the rumors are true that we're losing the County Art Museum, and if so, if there is something we could have done policy-wise that would have prevented that from happening. That's item number 3. The one that really catches my attention is item 1, and about reviewing and pruning and correcting the entire Newport Beach Municipal Code. Like Councilwoman Gardner, I think seems like a very large undertaking, and I'm not totally sure it's worth it. But if we do that, I see visions of that kind of being like, I think it was 2 years ago, that I assume it was the city attorney and city manager went through what are nominally your city council policies and came back with a very big pile of stuff one night. The public and you had just a few days to review that, and I don't think any of us knew what was being revised in terms of your policies or why. And now, especially with only 3 minutes of comment, I don't think these changes are going to be vetted very well. So I would really recommend, if you're planning to go with that, which I think is maybe too ambitious an undertaking, but if you were, that there be some mechanism for some public input before a huge pile of changes comes back with just a couple of days to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? All right, seeing none, I will bring this back, and I will move the item for approval.
Second.
Please vote.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Next item is motion for reconsideration.
A motion to reconsider the vote on any action taken by the City Council at either this meeting or the previous meeting may be made only by one of the council members who voted for the prevailing side.
Any motions for reconsideration? Seeing none, colleagues, we have two memorial adjournments tonight. The first is for Jay Robinson. Jay passed away on January 10th. He was the son of the late Frank and Frances Robinson, well known in Newport Beach for leading the efforts to save the Back Bay as a natural preserve. Jay helped spark his parents' interest in the cause and years later supported the efforts to place a memorial in their honor near the Back Bay. Jay was born in 1946 and raised in La Cañada and Newport Beach. He graduated from UCLA Law School and was admitted to the California Bar in 1972. Jay had a long and successful career as a trial attorney and worked as a senior partner for the law firm of Marone, Robinson, Frederick, and Foster. Jay spent most of his adult life in Toluca Lake and Lake Arrowhead and enjoyed boating, skiing, woodworking, playing the drums, telling jokes, photography, and movies. He is survived by his sister, Dana Prince, and her two children and his partner, her two children and his partner, Denise Loxton. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made in his honor to the Newport Bay Conservancy. Corona Del Mar resident Lisa Jordan passed away in November of last year. She was 41 years old. Lisa attended Harborview Elementary School and Corona Del Mar High School. She graduated from Laguna Beach High School and went on to study dance and earn a bachelor's degree from Cal State University, Long Beach. During her professional career, Lisa worked in marketing for technology and financial services companies. She was a member of the board of directors of Healing Odyssey, a Lake Forest-based nonprofit organization that provides support for cancer survivors. Lisa also served as a member of the Corona Del Mar Citizens Advisory Panel and as a volunteer for Working Wardrobes. Her interest in hobbies included travel, wine, and modern dance. Lisa is survived by her mother Peggy, her sister, and two brothers. In memory of Jay and Lisa, we adjourn tonight's meeting.